Hey there, tonight we're diving into the gritty and grimy world of Victorian factory workers, where the truth is, child-sized chimneys weren't the only tight squeezes they faced daily. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You find yourself standing at the entrance of a Victorian factory, where the air is so thick with soot it's practically a condiment. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, a time when progress was measured not just in steam engines and spinning jennies, but in how much grime could accumulate on your skin by the end of a 14-hour workday. That's right, 14 hours. Imagine the joy of spending more time with your favorite machines than with your family. And speaking of family, if you're under the age of 10, congratulations. You're probably already employed. The romanticized notion of the Industrial Revolution paints a picture of innovation and advancement, but for the average factory worker, it was more Oliver Twist than great expectations. While inventors like James Watt and George Stephenson were busy revolutionizing steam power and railways, you were likely caught in the thrum of a textile mill, dodging flying shuttles and hoping to keep all your fingers attached, a luxury not everyone enjoyed. In fact, missing digits were practically a worker's badge of honor, a testament to their survival in the mechanized jungle. Now, let's talk about working conditions, or as they were known back then, conditions. If you're thinking OSHA was around to ensure your safety, I've got a Victorian bridge to sell you. The average factory was a cacophony of clanging metal and hissing steam, with air quality that could rival a coal mine. Ventilation. That was as foreign as a weekend holiday. You'd find yourself breathing in a cocktail of dust and smoke, and if you worked in a match factory, phosphorus fumes, because who needs a functioning respiratory system anyway? Tuberculosis and chronic bronchitis were practically employee benefits, the kind you never signed up for but got anyway. Child labor laws existed, sort of, in the same way that unicorns exist. The Factory Act of 1833 was a step in the right direction, limiting the workday for children aged 9 to 13 to a mere 9 hours, and 12 hours for those between 13 and 18. But enforcement was as lax as your great-uncle's handshake. Many employers turned a blind eye because a smaller workforce, quite literally, meant lower wages and greater profits. The idea was simple. Why pay an adult when you can pay a child half the amount to crawl under machinery to fix jams? It's not like children's rights were a thing yet. Despite these Dickensian conditions, there was a certain allure to the factory life, at least on paper. The promise of steady employment drew droves of rural families into urban centres. The pay, though meagre, was more reliable than the uncertain yields of farming. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was a daily grind of monotony and danger. If you were lucky, you'd find camaraderie among fellow workers, sharing jokes over the whir of machines or commiserating about the latest injury. In a way, the factory floor was its own community, bonded by shared suffering and the occasional pint after work, assuming you had anything left after rent and bread. The economy of the time was a ruthless beast. While industrialists like Richard Arkwright were raking in profits, the average worker lived on the edge of poverty. Wages for a factory hand could be as low as 8 shillings a week, barely enough to cover the essentials. And if you thought overtime was a way to earn a little extra, think again. Working longer hours often meant the same pay, just with added exhaustion. It's no wonder that the Chartist movement gained momentum as workers clamoured for rights and representation in a society that seemed to have forgotten them. The social fabric was as frayed as a well-worn loom, with class divisions as stark as the soot-covered landscapes. Factory owners lived in relative opulence, enjoying the fruits of mechanization from the comfort of their suburban villas, while workers were packed into overcrowded tenements. These living conditions were breeding grounds for disease, with cholera outbreaks sweeping through communities like a grim reaper on overdrive. The disparity was glaring, but it was the norm, a testament to an era that prioritized progress over people. As the factory whistle blows, signaling the end of another grueling day, you join the throngs pouring into the streets, a sea of weary faces and tired bodies. The journey home is a trudge through narrow, winding alleys, with open sewers serving as a constant reminder of the city's underbelly. But hey, at least you've survived another day, and in the Victorian factory world, that's no small feat. So, was the Industrial Revolution a marvel of human ingenuity? Absolutely. But for you, the factory worker, it was a test of endurance in a world that was rapidly changing, often at your expense. While history books may celebrate the era's achievements, it's important to remember the grit and grime beneath the gears, the human cost of progress that powered the world's leap into modernity. And if you're ever feeling nostalgic, just remember, it's not all steam engines and spinning wheels. Sometimes it's just sweat, soot, and survival. As you shuffle home, weary to the bone from another day in the Dickensian dystopia that is the Victorian factory floor, let's take a moment to zoom out and examine the grand economic machine that chewed up your time and spat out just enough wage to keep you coming back for more. Welcome to capitalism in its rawest, most unrefined form, a time when factory owners were the tech billionaires of their day, complete with sky-high top hats and a penchant for profit that would make even the most ruthless venture capitalist blush. These titans of industry, like Richard Arkwright and his ilk, were the Jeff Bezoses of the 19th century, amassing fortunes that towered over the soot-streaked cityscapes. Arkwright, for instance, wasn't just content with a single mill. He created a sprawling empire of them. By the time of his death in 1792, his estate was worth a cool £500,000. In today's money, that's about £200 million, or enough to buy yourself a small island and a lifetime supply of monocles. Meanwhile, you, dear worker, were lucky to see 20 shillings a week, roughly translating to just over £1,000 a year in today's currency. That's about enough for a caffeine addiction at your local Starbucks, but not much else. While the factory owners luxuriated in their grandiose estates, you and your fellow workers were crammed into the inner-city slums like industrial sardines. These slums were as overcrowded as a Black Friday sale, with families squeezed into single rooms that doubled as kitchens, living quarters, and let's be honest, probably a makeshift infirmary during one of the many cholera outbreaks. Did someone say, "Home sweet home"? The stark wage disparity between the industrialists and their labourers wasn't just a quirk of the era. It was a foundational feature of the burgeoning capitalist system. The owners justified their wealth with the old chestnut of risk and reward, conveniently ignoring the very real risks you face daily, like, say, losing a limb to a rogue machine. The trickle-down effect was more like a trickle-up, with profits funneled straight to the top, while the base of the economic pyramid was left scrambling for crumbs. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the good old days. The industrial economy was less a well-oiled machine and more a relentless juggernaut that crushed anything in its path. As factories multiplied faster than Victorian moustaches, cities ballooned with a workforce drawn by the siren call of steady employment. Urban areas expanded at a pace that would give modern city planners palpitations, with London's population tripling between 1801 and 1851. Infrastructure and housing couldn't keep up, resulting in living conditions where spacious meant you could stretch your arms without thwacking a wall. The squalor of these urban slums was legendary. Imagine streets so narrow that sunlight was a luxury and sanitation was an afterthought. Open sewers ran like fetid veins through the neighborhoods, with the Thames itself doubling as a giant, foul-smelling drain. Disease was the constant companion of poverty, and cholera was the grim reaper's weapon of choice, sweeping through the city with alarming regularity. In 1849, a particularly vicious outbreak claimed the lives of 14,137 Londoners, more than enough to make you reconsider that glass of unfiltered water. Yet, amidst the grime and hardship, there was a certain macabre allure to the Victorian city. It was a place of possibilities, where the promise of progress dangled tantalizingly just out of reach. For many, the factory represented a step up from the uncertainties of rural life, where a bad harvest could spell disaster. But let's not kid ourselves. This was less about upward mobility and more about survival in a system that valued productivity over people. The reality was stark. The factory system was a crucible of capitalism, where workers toiled under conditions that would make a sweatshop look like a day spa. The promise of economic advancement was more a carrot on a stick than a tangible reward, with the social ladder greased by the sweat of those toiling at its base. As the gears of industry turned, so too did the wheels of social change, with labor movements beginning to stir like restless giants in the shadows. The rise of capitalism wasn't just an economic shift. It was a seismic social upheaval, challenging traditional hierarchies and reshaping the very fabric of society. For some, it was a golden age of opportunity and innovation. For others, it was a daily grind of exploitation and endurance. And while the history books may celebrate the era's technological triumphs, it's crucial to remember the human cost of this relentless march toward modernity. As you finally reach the door of your cramped tenement, the weight of the day's labor pressing down like a leaden cloak, you can take a small comfort in the camaraderie of your fellow workers. There's a grim solidarity in shared suffering, a bond forged in the fires of industry that offers a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. Because while the factory owners may have had the wealth and power, you and your fellow workers had something they could never buy: resilience. And that, my friend, is a currency that never devalues. So, as you collapse into your rickety bed, the sounds of the city drifting through the thin walls like a ghostly symphony, remember this: you're not alone in this struggle. The wheels of change are turning, slowly but surely, and while the road ahead is fraught with challenges, it's one that you and your fellow workers are determined to travel. After all, the Industrial Revolution may have been a marvel of human ingenuity, but it was also a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who powered it, one back-breaking shift at a time. As you drift into the uneasy embrace of Victorian slumber, the clamour of the factory is replaced by a different kind of noise, a rumble of discontent growing among your fellow workers. Welcome to the rise of labour unions, where the spirit of camaraderie you felt on the factory floor starts taking on a more organised, defiant edge. Think of it as the workers' version of the Avengers assembling, only with fewer superpowers and more pamphlets. The birth of labour unions in the 19th century was as much a necessity as it was an invention, with working conditions that could only be described as mildly soul-crushing. The average factory worker needed a voice louder than the whistle of a steam engine. Enter the unions, the collective megaphone for those who'd been stuck whispering in the smog-filled shadows. By the 1820s and 1830s, these organizations began to take shape, and by 1834, the Grand National Consolidated Trades Union was formed. It was a bold move, considering the legal environment was about as friendly to unions as a porcupine in a balloon factory. Robert Owen, a name you might recognize if you've ever dabbled in the idea of utopian socialism, was a key figure in this nascent movement. Owen was a kind of industrial messiah, preaching a gospel of improved working conditions and cooperative societies. He envisioned communities where labourers weren't just cogs in a machine, but valued participants in a harmonious society. Sounds dreamy, right? Owen's ideas were certainly ahead of their time, perhaps too far ahead, as his utopian communities often fizzled out faster than a Victorian candle in a drafty room. But back to those unions. Their rise wasn't exactly smooth sailing. It was more like attempting to row upstream without a paddle. The infamous 1834 Tolpuddle Martyrs case was a stark reminder of the risks involved. 6 agricultural labourers from Tolpuddle, Dorset, were arrested for forming a union and sentenced to transportation to Australia, a punishment akin to being sent to Mars in today's terms. The public outcry was immense, and after a massive campaign, the men were pardoned. Still, The incident underscored the precarious position of unions in a society that valued industrial output over human welfare. As the 19th century chugged along like a steam train with a dodgy boiler, strikes became the workers' weapon of choice, a way to say, hey, we're not just going to take this lying down. But organizing a strike back then was about as easy as herding cats, blindfolded, on roller skates. Take the Lancashire cotton famine of the 1860s, for instance. It was a time when cotton supplies dried up faster than a British summer, thanks to the American Civil War. The workers' response. A series of strikes that were as successful as New Year's resolutions, noble in intention, but often falling flat in execution. Despite this, the workers' tenacity was not for nothing. These strikes, even when they failed, chipped away at the ironclad facade of industrial capitalism. They planted seeds of change, slow to sprout, but resilient. The 1870s saw the legal climate begin to shift, with the Trade Union Act of 1871 recognizing unions as legal entities. It was a victory of sorts, though the struggle for fair wages and working conditions was far from over. Think of it as winning a battle in a war that was just getting started. Unions weren't just about strikes and negotiations. They were also about education and empowerment, providing members with resources that factory life sorely lacked. Classes on reading, writing, and arithmetic offered a glimmer of self-improvement in a world determined to keep workers in the dark. It was the dawn of a new social consciousness, where workers began to see themselves as more than just labourers. They were part of a broader movement towards equality and justice. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The push and pull between progress and exploitation was, and still is, a complex dance. Factory workers were the unsung heroes of the Industrial Revolution, driving the economic engine while enduring conditions that were a cocktail of danger and monotony. They were the background noise to history's grand symphony, their contributions often overshadowed by the achievements of the elite. Yet, without their relentless toil, the era's technological advancements would have remained mere scribbles on a blueprint. As for their soundtrack, it wasn't the uplifting rags-to-riches ballad you might expect. It was more like a relentless clanging of machines, a symphony of industry that drowned out any dreams of a better life. But amidst the noise, there was a rhythm, a heartbeat of resistance, a tempo of tenacity. The workers' resilience was the true melody of the industrial age, echoing through the annals of history as a testament to human endurance. So, as you lay there in your cramped quarters, pondering the day's toil and tomorrow's uncertainties, remember this. Change is a slow burn. It's the light at the end of a very long, very sooty tunnel. The struggles of Victorian factory workers weren't just about better wages or shorter hours. They were about dignity, respect, and the right to be heard in a world that preferred to listen to the clatter of commerce. Their legacy is one of perseverance and solidarity, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit is an unyielding force. And while the Industrial Revolution churned on, reshaping landscapes and societies, its true legacy lies in the stories of those who powered its relentless march. The workers, with their calloused hands and weary hearts, were not mere footnotes in history. They were its driving force, pushing against the tide of exploitation in a quest for a brighter, fairer future. So next time you hear the distant echo of a machine, remember the workers who stood in its shadow, and the indomitable spirit that brought them into the light. But let's not get too carried away with the notion that those who toiled in the shadow of towering smokestacks were simply extras in the grand drama of industrial progress. Because here's the thing. While the Industrial Revolution is often celebrated as the dawn of modernity, for the average worker, it was more like the dawn of existential dread. Picture this. While inventors were busy chiseling their names into history books, you were staring down the barrel of yet another 14-hour grind fest, the sooty air your constant companion. Ah, the good old days of innovation and progress, when steam engines roared and factories buzzed with the promise of a brighter future. But was it really the golden era of advancement that some would have us believe, or just a cleverly marketed version of smoke and mirrors? Let's unravel this yarn using none other than Charles Dickens, the ultimate wordsmith of Victorian woe, who had a knack for cutting through the romanticized fluff to reveal the grimy underbelly of industrial life. In novels like Hard Times, Dickens didn't just write stories. He unleashed scathing critiques of the industrial age. He painted Coketown, a fictional yet all-too-real representation of northern English industrial towns, as a place where the only thing more oppressive than the factory smoke was the monotony that blanketed the lives of its inhabitants. It was a town of red brick, he wrote, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. A poetic way of saying that even the buildings looked like they needed a long, hot bath. And while Dickens might have waxed lyrical about the soot and grime, he was far from alone in his criticism. The social reformers of the time were practically forming a queue to highlight the grim realities behind the industrial sheen. The factory system was lauded for its efficiency, but at what cost? Workers were the cogs in a machine that didn't care if they broke down, as long as the gears kept turning. Progress, it seems, was just a euphemism for more work with less pay. Now, let's talk about those technological advances that were supposedly lifting humanity to new heights. The steam engine, the spinning jenny, the power loom, each was a marvel of engineering that promised to elevate society. But here's the kicker. While machines got more sophisticated, workers found their skills devalued. The more automated the process, the less you were worth. Skilled artisans were replaced by unskilled labourers who could be paid a pittance, making sure that the industrialists' pockets were as deep as the workers' despair. And what about the legendary inventions like the steam locomotive? Sure, it shrunk distances and opened up new markets, but it also meant you could be transporting to another city to work in an even bigger, louder factory. Railways were the arteries of the industrial world, but for the average worker, they were just another way to be shuffled around like pawns on an ever-expanding chessboard. Yet, despite the drudgery, there was a certain allure to this relentless march of progress. The factories were seen as the cathedrals of a new age, where the promise of steady employment and the chance to be part of something bigger lured people in like moths to a flame. It was easy to get swept up in the grandeur of it all, until you realized that being part of the Industrial Revolution meant you were usually under it, crushed by its weight. Now let's bust another myth, this idea that factory workers were passive victims in the industrial narrative. Far from it. They were active participants in their own survival, navigating a system that was rigged against them with resilience and ingenuity. Remember those labor unions we talked about. They weren't just about strikes and protests. They were also about creating a sense of community and identity in a dehumanizing environment. Workers banded together, sharing knowledge and resources in a bid to carve out a better life amid the chaos. But let's be real. The odds were stacked higher than a Victorian chimney sweep on stilts. The promise of progress was often just a carrot dangled on a very long, very elusive stick. And while some managed to climb the social ladder, many more found themselves stuck on the bottom rung, watching the good old days pass by like a train they couldn't afford to board. The truth is, the Industrial Revolution was a time of stark contrasts. For every story of success and innovation, there were countless others of exploitation and hardship. It was an era where the line between progress and oppression was as thin as the soot-laden air, and where the cost of advancement was paid in sweat, tears, and sometimes blood. So, as we peer through the smog of history, it's important to remember that the good old days were a mixed bag of marvels and misery. The factories may have hummed with the promise of a new world, but it was a world built on the backs of those who labored in their shadow. And while the myth of progress persists, the reality is that for the average worker, the Industrial Revolution was less about innovation and more about endurance. As the gears of history continue to turn, leaving us to wonder whether progress is just a posh way of saying more work for the same pay, we tip our hats to those who endured the relentless grind. Because in the grand tapestry of human achievement, it's the stories of those who toiled in the shadows that remind us that the true cost of progress is often measured in human resilience. And here we are at the grand finale, where the Victorian factory workers' legacy is as indelible as the soot stains on their collars. You see, all that back-breaking labour, dodging machines like a real-life game of Frogger, didn't just vanish into the annals of history. No, it laid the groundwork for modern labour laws and rights, the unsung heroes of your cosy office job. Ever wonder why you're not pulling a 14-hour shift at the local widget factory? Thank those Victorian workers. Their struggles were a messy but crucial step towards the 8-hour workday, weekends, and paid vacations, concepts as foreign to them as Wi-Fi. The seeds of change were sown in the smoke-choked factories, watered by the sweat of workers who dared to say, "Enough." Fast forward to 1919, when the International Labour Organization proposed the 8-hour workday. It was revolutionary, akin to suggesting that cats and dogs could live together in harmony. But the groundwork was laid by those Victorian trailblazers, who turned their workplaces into battlegrounds for rights we now take for granted. And then came the mid-20th century, when labour rights really found their groove. Minimum wage laws, workers' compensation, and health and safety regulations sprouted like daisies in the industrial wasteland. By the time the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 rolled around, ensuring a safer work environment, the Victorian ghosts were probably high-fiving each other in the beyond. The Act was a far cry from their days of breathing in air so thick it could be sliced and served on toast. But let's not pretend all is perfect in the world of work. Sure, the factories may be quieter and the air a smidge less toxic, but the spirit of exploitation has evolved, wearing new disguises. Enter the gig economy, where the hustle never sleeps and workers are independent contractors, a fancy term for please bring your own safety net. Victorian factory work and the gig economy are a bit like distant cousins. Both involve long hours, low pay, and a lack of job security. The main difference, instead of fearing steam-powered machines, today's workers wrestle with algorithms and endless app notifications. Progress, right? Today, gig workers might envy that Victorian sense of solidarity, the camaraderie forged in the fires of industry. In the age of remote work and freelance gigs, it's every worker for themselves, battling isolation with the occasional Slack chat and virtual happy hour. It's hard to form a union when your workplace is a Starbucks corner table or your living room couch. The Victorian factory floor may have been a Dickensian nightmare, but at least you had someone to share your woes over a pint. Despite these modern woes, let's not forget the victories. The 8-hour workday is a testament to the power of collective action, a reminder that change is possible even in the bleakest of times. And while the gig economy presents fresh challenges, it's also spurred discussions about universal basic income, labour rights for freelancers, and the need for a safety net in a rapidly changing world. So, as you close your laptop after another day of Zoom calls and digital drudgery, take a moment to thank those Victorian workers. Their grit and determination paved the way for the rights you enjoy today, even if it means trading in a soot-covered factory for a Wi-Fi-dependent home office. And next time you lament the tedium of remote work, remember, at least you're not risking life and limb in a textile mill. In the end, the legacy of the Victorian factory worker is one of resilience and transformation. They were the unsung architects of a better future, their toil and tenacity lighting the way for labour rights we now hold dear. Their struggles remind us that progress is never a straight path. It's a winding road paved with sweat, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of a fairer world. As history's gears continue to turn, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, ensuring that the march of progress is guided by compassion and equality. Because if the Victorian factory worker taught us anything, it's that the human spirit is as indomitable as it is inspiring, a force that once ignited can light up even the darkest corners of history. Just as the sun cracks the horizon over the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there's a bustling hive of activity that's hard to ignore. Welcome to Mesopotamia, the OG of civilization. If you ever thought your morning commute was a drag, spare a thought for the ancient Mesopotamians. Picture a scene where oxen-drawn carts jostle for space on dusty pathways, merchants haggle loudly, and city gates swing open to a cacophony that would make New York's rush hour sound like a lullaby. Now, let's zoom in on the Sumerians, the maestros of this ancient orchestra. Around 3100 BCE, these folks were not just doodling on some clay tablets. They were creating the world's first writing system, cuneiform. Imagine trying to text your friend using a stylus and a lump of clay. A simple "what's up" might take hours to carve. But hey, it was a start, and we owe them our gratitude for kick-starting written communication. The Sumerians were also engineering whizzes. While you might be thinking their greatest invention was the wheel, you'd be right, but here's the kicker. It wasn't for chariots initially. Nope, these early wheels were for pottery, because nothing says civilization like a well-crafted clay pot. Eventually, they got around to using wheels for transportation, revolutionizing trade and travel. This invention was a game-changer, literally, as it moved goods and ideas faster than ever before. Speaking of fast, let's slow down and talk about the Sumerians' early stab at democracy. I know democracy in ancient times seem like an oxymoron, but hear me out. The Sumerians had a system where they could voice concerns and participate in local governance, a precursor to more formal democratic systems. It's not quite a one-person, one-vote democracy, but more like one person, one chance to speak loudly before the king gets bored. Still, it was a step closer to the systems we know today. But what about those moody gods of theirs? The Sumerian pantheon was as unpredictable as a cat with a laser pointer. They had gods for everything, and just like teenagers without Wi-Fi, these deities could be downright temperamental. Anu, the sky god, was the big cheese, while Enlil, the god of air, was known for being a bit of a hothead. Their moods were as changeable as the Mesopotamian weather, and keeping them happy was a full-time job. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were political and economic hubs where priests acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people. In the end, the Sumerians gave us more than just zigzagged scripts and spinning wheels. They laid the groundwork for urban life, with cities like Uruk and serving as early prototypes for modern metropolises. These urban centers had walls for protection, bustling markets for trade, and even early forms of zoning. Basically, the ancient version of "not in my backyard" debates. And while their gods might have been erratic, the Sumerians themselves were anything but. They were the architects of civilization, building a society that, despite its quirks and chaos, set the stage for centuries of human progress. So next time you're stuck in traffic or grumbling about your slow Wi-Fi, give a nod to the Sumerians. They might have been the original commuters and tech nerds, and without them, we might still be trying to figure out how to send a message without ending up with clay under our fingernails. Now let's swap the fertile plains of Mesopotamia for the sun-baked sands of Egypt, where the pyramids loom large, not just in size, but in the annals of human ambition. Forget the couch to 5K challenge. Try Couch to Khufu's pyramid, the largest of the lot, towering at 481 feet. That's like stacking the Statue of Liberty on top of itself, and then some. And while we're dazzled by their sheer scale, it's time to dig into the nitty-gritty of what these grandiose structures really were. The ultimate show of royal muscle and manpower. Sure, we could wax lyrical about the pyramids as eternal resting places for pharaohs, but that's only half the story. In reality, these were the ancient world's version of a vanity project, with a side of economic stimulus. You see, in the Old Kingdom around 2500 BCE, when the pyramids of Giza were constructed, Egypt's rulers needed to project their divine authority. And what better way than with a building project that screamed, "I'm so powerful, I can move mountains." Literally, in this case. Imagine more than 2-3 million limestone blocks, each weighing up to 15 tons, being hauled over several miles to form the Great Pyramid. This wasn't just an architectural feat. It was a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned project manager break out in a cold sweat. Theories abound about how the blocks were moved, ramps, levers, aliens. We'll get to that in a bit. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. What we do know is it took a lot of manpower, or as we like to call them, pyramid builders, to get the job done. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. Forget the image of a whip-cracking overseer driving slaves to exhaustion. Recent findings suggest that the workers were more like a well-fed, salaried workforce, complete with on-site housing and healthcare. These guys had it better than some modern-day interns. They worked in shifts, took pride in their craft, and were even buried near the pyramids, which was a serious posthumous perk. Talk about employee benefits, but let's not romanticize too much. The conditions were still harsh, and the work was backbreaking. Imagine spending your days in the blistering heat, shaping stones with crude tools, all while trying to avoid injury, or worse. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the alien angle. Sure, the idea that extraterrestrials swung by to lend a hand is appealing. After all, who else but beings from another planet could fathom such engineering prowess? But alas, it's more likely the result of human ingenuity and a lot of elbow grease. Sorry, UFO enthusiasts, but the truth is often less thrilling than fiction. Economically, these projects were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they kept the economy humming by employing thousands, but on the other, they were a massive drain on resources and could tip the scales if things went south. When the Nile failed to flood, crops withered, and suddenly, the grandeur of a pyramid seemed like a frivolous expense. Talk about a budget crisis. Politically, the pyramids were more than monuments. They were statements of stability and continuity. Pharaohs like Khufu and Sneferu used them to cement their legacy and assert their divine right to rule. In a way, they were the original influencers, crafting a brand that said, "I'm not just a king, I'm a god on earth." And in a society as hierarchical as ancient Egypt, that was a message you wanted to get across loud and clear. Yet, despite all the grandeur, there was a very human side to these colossal projects. From the graffiti left by workers, essentially ancient bathroom stall scribbles, to the archaeological evidence of injuries and medical treatments, we get glimpses of the everyday life of those who toiled under the desert sun. It's a reminder that behind the history and mythology were real people with real lives, much like us today, albeit with a few more blisters. So, as we gaze up at these majestic structures, let's remember that they're more than just stone and mortar. They're a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and the eternal quest for immortality. In the next installment, we'll continue to unravel the mysteries of these ancient marvels and explore how they shaped the fabric of Egyptian society. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of pharaohs, pyramids, and the people who made them possible. As we leave the shadow of Egypt's towering pyramids, let's cross the Mediterranean for a sun-soaked rendezvous with ancient Greece, a place where democracy was as much a public spectacle as the Olympics, and philosophy was the ultimate hipster endeavor, complete with togas as the original ironic fashion statement. First up, Athens, the cradle of democracy and arguably the world's first political reality show. Around 508 BCE, the Athenians decided to give this whole rule by the people thing a whirl. This wasn't your grandma's democracy, though. Only male citizens could vote, which meant a whopping 10–20% of the population had a say. Women, slaves, and foreigners. Sorry, no ballots for you. But hey, it was a start. Think of it as the beta version of democracy, complete with bugs and a steep learning curve. Political debates were practically a spectator sport. Picture it. The Pnyx Hill, where citizens gathered to hear speeches that were part debate, part performance art. And who could resist the verbal sparring of orators like Pericles and Demosthenes? These guys were the rock stars of rhetoric, drawing crowds like ancient TED Talks, minus the PowerPoint slides. But while the ideal was a city where everyone had a voice, the reality was more like a noisy family dinner where only a few got to dominate the conversation. Now, speaking of conversation starters, enter the philosophers, ancient Greece's answer to the modern-day hipster. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were the OG thinkers, hanging around the agora, sipping wine and questioning everything. If you think Socrates invented the Socratic method to make students squirm, you're not wrong. His relentless questioning made him a gadfly, buzzing around the complacency of Athenian society. He was like that friend who always points out plot holes in movies, but with a philosophical twist. Plato, his star pupil, took these ideas and ran with them, setting up the academy around 387 BCE, a place where students could ponder life's big questions without worrying about pesky things like finding a job. Meanwhile, Aristotle, Plato's own student, decided to explore the practical side of philosophy, delving into ethics, politics, and the natural world. He was the ultimate multitasker, penning works on everything from metaphysics to zoology. In essence, if you think of these philosophers as the original thinkfluencers, you're not far off. But let's not get too swept away by notions of toga-clad intellectuals debating under olive trees. Beneath the polished marble of Athens, there was a gritty underbelly. For starters, slavery was rampant. While the Athenians waxed poetic about freedom and equality, they relied heavily on the labor of slaves to keep society running smoothly. In fact, it's estimated that slaves made up about a third of Athens' population. These were the folks doing the hard graft, so citizens could indulge in politics and philosophy. And then there was warfare. The Greeks may have been all about the good life, wine, theatre, and the pursuit of knowledge, but they were also fierce warriors. The Persian Wars, starting in 499 BCE, were a testament to this. Imagine the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, a ragtag army of Athenians and Plataeans facing off against a much larger Persian force. Against the odds, the Greeks emerged victorious, a feat that boosted their confidence and laid the groundwork for the so-called Golden Age of Athens. But before you start picturing a utopia of peace and prosperity, remember that Athens' glorious age was built on the back of continuous conflict. The Peloponnesian War with Sparta, from 431 to 404 BCE, was a brutal affair that shattered Athens' supremacy. This wasn't a battle of ideals, but a clash of ambitions, fueled by power, pride, and the occasional plague. Spoiler alert, Athens didn't come out on top. Sparta's victory marked a turning point, proving that even the mightiest can fall when hubris gets the better of them. So, what's the takeaway from this Athenian saga? It's a classic tale of idealism versus reality. The Greeks dreamed big, crafting a legacy of democracy, philosophy, and culture that still resonates today. Yet their society was riddled with contradictions, championing freedom while shackling slaves, celebrating wisdom while waging wars. It's a reminder that history is never as simple as it appears, and the stories we tell often gloss over the messy bits. In our next exploration, we'll dive deeper into these complexities, peeling back the layers of Greek society to reveal both the brilliance and the blindness of its people. We'll look at how their innovations laid the groundwork for Western civilization, while also examining the shadows cast by their achievements. So, stay tuned as we continue our journey through the ancient world, where myth and reality intertwine in ways both fascinating and flawed. As we peel back the layers of Greek society, eager to see both the brilliance and the blindness of its people, it's time to hop across the Ionian Sea and say, salve to the Romans. The Roman Empire, where roads weren't just pathways, but a testament to engineering that makes modern highways look like dirt tracks. These were the glory days of Rome, where they didn't just paint the town red. They painted the known world in the colors of conquest. Let's kick things off with those famous Roman roads. Picture this: over 250,000 miles of road, with about 50,000 miles paved, crisscrossing the empire like veins carrying the lifeblood of commerce, military might, and let's be honest, gossip. The Romans were the original road warriors, and they didn't just build roads. They concocted masterpieces of stone and gravel that connected disparate corners of their vast domain. Ever heard the saying, "All roads lead to Rome"? It wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a literal truth. These roads were marvels of construction, featuring multi-layered foundations that would make a wedding cake jealous. They were built to last, and some are still in use today, which is more than can be said for that IKEA desk you bought last year. Now, while these roads supported bustling trade and travel, they weren't initially built for leisurely Sunday drives in a chariot. Nope, they were military conduits, allowing Roman legions to march at double time across the empire. The efficiency of these roads meant that a Roman soldier could cover about 20 miles a day in full gear, ready to enforce Pax Romana, or, as the locals might have seen it, Pax Romana's iron fist. Roads weren't just infrastructure, they were imperial arteries, pumping Roman influence to every corner of the realm at breakneck speed. But how did Rome manage such an extensive and cohesive empire? Well, it wasn't all toga parties and great feeding. Rome's expansion was a cocktail of military might, shrewd political maneuvering, and a dash of good old-fashioned intimidation. Take, for instance, Julius Caesar. This guy didn't just cross the Rubicon, he redefined the phrase hostile takeover. By the time Caesar was done with Gaul, around 50 BCE, he'd added nearly 300,000 square miles of territory to the empire, and he did it with a ruthlessness that would make Machiavelli blush. Caesar wasn't alone in his ambition. The Roman legions were a force to be reckoned with, numbering around 150,000 soldiers at their peak. These weren't your average foot soldiers. They were highly trained professionals, armed with the pilum and gladius, and backed by a well-oiled supply line that ensured they were always ready to rumble. The Roman military machine was a masterclass in logistics and strategy, a powerhouse that could crush rebellions and expand borders with the same efficiency. And when they weren't fighting, they were building forts, walls, and those aforementioned roads. Ensuring Rome's dominance was as much about bricks and mortar as it was about blood and steel. Yet, all this might and majesty had a darker side. Rome's economy was a double-edged gladius, heavily reliant on slave labor. Forget the romanticized image of slaves lounging in villas. The reality was more akin to a brutal sweatshop. An estimated one-third of Rome's population were slaves, toiling away in quarries, mines, and on vast agricultural estates. These weren't just captives from far-off lands. They were the backbone of the Roman economy, driving the wealth that funded everything from lavish gladiatorial games to the construction of the Colosseum. The Roman approach to slavery was brutal and pragmatic, with slaves seen as property rather than people. This wasn't just an economic necessity. It was a social institution deeply ingrained in Roman culture. The Roman elite lived lives of luxury, thanks in no small part to the sweat and suffering of their slaves. And while some slaves could earn their freedom, a process known as manumission, many others faced a life of relentless hardship and uncertainty. Political intrigue was the icing on Rome's tumultuous cake. If you thought modern politics was a cutthroat game, Roman politics was like a gladiatorial fight, minus the lions, most of the time. Take the infamous year of the four emperors, 69 CE, where Rome cycled through rulers like a Netflix series you just can't commit to. Power struggles and assassinations were par for the course, with political machinations that would put today's scandal-ridden headlines to shame. And speaking of emperors, how about the infamous Nero? Here was a guy who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned in 64 CE, though the fiddle bit is likely apocryphal since the violin hadn't been invented. Nero was the kind of emperor who thought of himself as an artist first, ruler second, and a decent human being. Well, somewhere down the list. His reign was marked by excess and paranoia, with his name forever associated with tyranny and debauchery. Yet, despite the chaos, Rome stood firm, held together by a complex web of alliances, military strength, and an uncanny ability to adapt. The Romans were nothing if not resilient, and their ability to assimilate and innovate ensured the empire's longevity. From the bustling forums to the imposing amphitheaters, Rome was a hub of activity, a melting pot of cultures and ideas that shaped the Western world. So, as we take a step back from the hustle and bustle of Rome's streets, let's appreciate the paradox of this ancient superpower. Rome was a land of contradictions, advancing civilization while perpetuating brutality, crafting laws while undermining liberty. It was an empire built on ambition, yet haunted by its own excesses. Stay tuned as we continue our journey through the ancient world, diving deeper into the intricacies of Roman life and exploring how an empire that seemed unassailable eventually stumbled under its own weight. We'll unravel the threads of its decline, while still marveling at the legacy it left behind. There's more to uncover in the tale of Rome, where history and legend collide in a saga as complex as the roads that once connected it all. But even the mightiest empires have their Achilles heel. And for Rome, it was the perfect storm of economic turmoil, political chaos, and those pesky barbarian invasions that really did them in. Imagine a society where your economic strategy is as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. By the 3rd century CE, Rome's economy was about as robust as a damp paper towel. Inflation was sky-high, with the once mighty denarius becoming worth less than the copper it was minted on. As if that wasn't enough, the empire's vast trade network was fraying at the edges, like an overused carpet unraveling under constant pressure. Part of this economic meltdown was due to Rome's relentless expansion. When you've got an empire that stretches from Britain to Egypt, managing it is a bit like herding cats, and not the cute, cuddly kind. We're talking feral beasts with sharp claws. The cost of maintaining such a colossal empire was bleeding Rome dry. They had to pay their legions, build infrastructure, and keep the local elites happy enough not to revolt. Think of it as trying to keep all your plates spinning while riding a unicycle on a tightrope, and you've got a fear of heights. Politically, the situation was even messier. If you thought the Roman Senate was a model of decorum, think again. By the time the 3rd century rolls around, Rome's leadership was a revolving door of emperors, each trying to outdo the last in terms of incompetence or extravagance. Picture a soap opera where the main plot twist is which emperor gets assassinated next. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome had at least 26 emperors, a number that would make even the most chaotic of boardrooms look like a lesson in stability. And then, of course, there were the barbarian invasions. Now, before you start picturing hordes of unwashed, fur-clad warriors with a penchant for destruction, let's set the record straight. These so-called barbarians weren't just mindless marauders. They were complex tribes with their own societies, like the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Vandals. The Visigoths, under Alaric, famously sacked Rome in 410 CE. Imagine the shock of seeing the Eternal City ransacked by people whose names you can't pronounce and whose motives seem as inscrutable as your last tax return. The barbarians weren't the sole architects of Rome's demise, but they certainly gave the empire a metaphorical shove when it was already teetering. The truth is, these invasions were more of a migration than a hostile takeover. Many of these groups were pushed into Roman lands by the Huns, led by Attila, a guy whose reputation was fearsome enough to make even the toughest Roman rethink their life choices. Attila's incursions into the empire in the mid-5th century were the stuff of nightmares, but they were as much about survival as they were about conquest. As the empire struggled to fend off these external pressures, it faced internal fractures too. In 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian decided that managing the unwieldy beast that Rome had become was a two-person job. He split the empire into the Western Roman Empire, ruled from Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Byzantium. It was like a corporate restructuring, except with more swords and fewer board meetings. This division was meant to streamline administration and defense, but it also sowed the seeds of future discord. The Eastern Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, managed to hold its own and even flourish for 1,000 years. But the Western Empire, not so much. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire had shrunk to the point where it was little more than Italy and a few outposts. The last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. And just like that, the curtain fell on a millennium-long saga, though not with a bang but a whimper. So, did Rome truly fall? Well, yes and no. The romanticized narrative of Rome collapsing in a single dramatic moment is, frankly, a bit of a fairy tale. What we see instead is a gradual transformation, a shifting of gears from the classical world to the Middle Ages. In many ways, the so-called fall of Rome was more of a metamorphosis, with its legacy living on through its laws, architecture, and the very concept of empire itself. The Middle Ages, often painted as a dark and dreary time, were really more like a rebirth, a time of reorganization and reinvention. The chaos of Rome's decline paved the way for new power structures and fresh ideas. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving the knowledge of the ancient world, while feudalism laid the groundwork for modern nation-states. It's as if Rome's collapse cleared the stage for a new act in the grand play of history. In the end, Rome's story isn't just about power lost or cities sacked. It's about resilience, adaptation, and the enduring influence of a civilization that, despite its flaws, changed the course of history. Rome may have stumbled, but its spirit marched on, woven into the very fabric of the world that followed. So, as you ponder the echoes of Rome in our modern world, remember that history is never a straight line. It's a tapestry of triumphs, failures, and everything in between. And like any good story, it's always worth telling, again and again. In the great cosmic sitcom that is human history, ancient civilizations were the original overachievers. Picture the Sumerians, hanging out by the Euphrates about 5,000 years ago, deciding that it was high time to invent writing. And not just any writing, but cuneiform, the clay tablet equivalent of a post-it note. Why scribble on paper when you can etch squiggles into a slab of mud, right? These guys weren't just doodling for fun, though. They were laying down the groundwork for bureaucrats, poets, and tax collectors everywhere. Cuneiform wasn't just about flexing intellectual muscles. It was a tool of power, a way to keep track of who owed what to whom, a vital service in a society where livestock was currency and writing was the ultimate flex. Imagine the Sumerian accountant, or rather, the poor soul tasked with deciphering these clay notes, essentially the ancient world's IT guy. They were the unsung heroes, making sure no one absconded with your goats without you knowing. Fast forward to Egypt, the land of pharaohs, pyramids, and a labor force that could rival any modern-day construction company. The Egyptians took the concept of build it, and they will come to a whole new level, except they were building for the dead, not the living. These sky-high tombs weren't just architectural wonders. They were economic sinkholes of epic proportions. The Great Pyramid of Giza alone took about 20 years to complete, involving tens of thousands of workers and an estimated 3 million blocks of stone. Each stone weighed as much as 15 tons, and no, they didn't have cranes or bulldozers, just sheer manpower and maybe a lot of yelling. But why go through all this trouble? Well, Egyptians believed in the afterlife with the kind of fervor that would make even the most committed afterlife insurance salesmen blush. Pharaohs needed to be equipped for eternity, which meant constructing lavish tombs that sent a clear message. I was a big deal. But behind every massive pyramid was a workforce of laborers and artisans, the real magicians who pulled off these feats without the modern conveniences we take for granted. And let's not forget the ancient accountants who kept track of the rations and resources. Without them, the pharaohs might have had to settle for a modest tomb with a view. Now, we often romanticize these grand structures, imagining serene, golden-hued sunsets over the pyramids. Yet the reality was a bit grittier. Building these monoliths was a grueling affair, filled with blood, sweat, and probably a fair amount of swearing. It wasn't pharaohs lifting those stones. It was thousands of laborers, likely fueled by bread, beer, and dreams of a better afterlife, or at least a day off. Let's take a moment to appreciate the irony that while the pharaohs were busy preparing for the afterlife, the real action was happening among the living. The building of pyramids wasn't just about religious devotion. It was a state-funded project that kept the economy humming and the populace employed. It's almost like the ancient version of a New Deal, except instead of bridges and roads, you got tombs and more tombs. So, what drove these ancient folks to invest so heavily in such monumental constructions? Partly, it was politics. A big, shiny pyramid was the ultimate status symbol, a way for pharaohs to assert their power and ensure their legacy. But it was also about control, about keeping the workforce busy and the social order intact. It's hard to revolt when you're busy hauling limestone up a hill. In summary, while the ancient world might seem like a distant, mystical place, it was driven by surprisingly familiar motivations: power, economics, and the eternal struggle to leave a mark on the world, whether through a clay tablet or a towering pyramid. These civilizations were complex, sophisticated, and yes, occasionally absurd, but they set the stage for everything that followed. And remember, behind every great monument was a legion of workers, and a few stressed-out accountants making sure the whole thing didn't collapse, literally and financially. While the ancient world's monumental constructs have gone down in history as feats of engineering genius, let's plunge into the tangled web of politics and social structures that make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. Welcome to Rome, where politicians were already playing 4D chess centuries before any PR firm could spin a narrative. Picture Julius Caesar, the original political influencer, striding through the forum with more swagger than a rock star at a fan convention. His weapon of choice wasn't a sword, but a sharp mind and a knack for public spectacle. Take his famous crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC, a literal river of no return that catapulted him into a civil war. The man knew how to work a crowd and turn a political crisis into a personal brand. "Alia iacta est," he declared. "The die is cast," a mic drop moment that would echo through history. And let's not forget the Roman Senate, a cauldron of ambition and backstabbing that makes modern politics look downright polite. These guys were the original spin doctors, crafting laws and alliances with the finesse of a master chef seasoning a stew. Behind their marble facades lay a world of scandal that would leave even the most jaded tabloid journalist clutching their pearls. One of the juiciest tales involves Publius Clodius Pulcher, a senator whose antics included cross-dressing to crash a women-only religious festival, leading to a courtroom drama that had all of Rome buzzing. But hold onto your togas, because Greece was throwing its own kind of party. Forget the image of serene philosophers debating under olive trees. The real action was at the symposiums, which were less about philosophical musings and more about who could outdrink Socrates. The symposium was a social institution where wine flowed like the Aegean Sea, and men gathered to debate, plot, and occasionally break into song. Think of it as a cross between a TED talk and a frat party. Yet behind the reverie and rhetoric lay a harsh reality. Both Rome and Greece were built on the backs of slave economies. Enslaved people were the invisible machinery propelling these ancient societies forward. In Rome, slaves could number up to a third of the population, performing everything from household chores to backbreaking labor in mines. For the elite, owning slaves was as much a status symbol as owning a villa with a view of the Tiber. The Greek city-states weren't much different. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was also a hub for the slave trade. Imagine a bustling agora where ideas and goods exchanged hands, but so did human lives. The Athenians might have prided themselves on their democratic values, but their democracy was built on a foundation of inequality. The Athenian citizen, freed from manual labor by the toil of others, could afford to ponder the mysteries of the universe or engage in political discourse. And let's not romanticize the lives of the common folks too much either. In both Rome and Greece, the lower classes lived a life far removed from the grandeur of public spectacles or philosophical debates. Roman plebeians, for instance, often resided in cramped, insulary, multi-story apartment blocks that were fire hazards waiting to happen. The poet Juvenal quipped that the common man could only dream of bread and circuses, a sardonic commentary on how the state kept the masses content with food handouts and grandiose public games. In Greece, farmers and labourers faced their own struggles. The hoplite, a citizen soldier, might have been celebrated as a defender of the city-state. But when not at war, these men returned to tilling fields and eking out a living in a landscape as unforgiving as it was beautiful. The idyllic scenes painted on ancient pottery often gloss over the back-breaking work and precarious existence of the majority. So here's the kicker. While ancient Rome and Greece left us legacies of philosophy, law, and architectural marvels, they were also societies steeped in inequality and powered by the exploitation of human labor. It's a sobering reminder that the same stone that carved temples and theaters also built prisons and chains. As we peel back the layers of history, we find a world remarkably familiar in its complexities and contradictions. And just like that, we're left with a tale of ambition and excess, of power plays and human cost. A story that begs us to question what we value and how we choose to remember. We'll dive deeper into these legacies in the next act, where the echoes of ancient politics and social structures continue to shape the world we know today. But for now, let's savor the irony of empires built on grand visions and gritty realities, a tale as old as time and as fresh as tomorrow's headlines. As we dive headlong into the economic underbelly of ancient civilizations, prepare to have your romantic notions of opulence dashed against the rocky shores of reality. You might think Rome was all about togas and feasts, yet the true cost of living in antiquity was more like a precarious balancing act on the edge of a very steep cliff. Ancient economies weren't just about accumulating gold and glory. They were a game of survival where one bad harvest could send ripples through the empire faster than a viral tweet. Let's start with the myth of the endlessly wealthy Roman elite. Sure, the top 1% had villas with more marble than a modern kitchen showroom, but the average Roman citizen was more concerned with scoring their next loaf of bread. The infamous bread and circuses weren't just for entertainment, they were a state-sponsored survival strategy. Rome imported over 200,000 tons of grain annually, mainly from Egypt, to feed its growing population. Without these grain shipments, the city would have faced hunger on a scale that would make a modern food shortage seem like a minor inconvenience. And who could forget the epic trade routes crisscrossing the ancient world? Before Amazon Prime, there was the Silk Road, a trade network that stretched over 4,000 miles, connecting China to the Mediterranean. It was the ancient world's version of global shipping, taking years instead of days, with merchants facing dangers ranging from bandits to sandstorms. The Silk Road wasn't just about luxury goods either. It was the lifeline of cross-cultural exchange, spreading everything from silk and spices to ideas and innovations. This web of trade routes was the ancient internet, linking civilizations long before anyone had heard of a Wi-Fi connection. But hold your horses, or rather, your camels, because here's the kicker. These routes weren't just paved with gold and silk. They were fraught with peril, with merchants gambling their fortunes on treacherous journeys. A shipment lost to a storm or marauders could spell ruin for a trader, making today's stock market crashes look like a minor hiccup. Yet these routes were the veins through which the lifeblood of ancient economies flowed, connecting distant lands in ways that seem almost unimaginable. Now, let's talk money, literally. The ancient world wasn't just bartering goats for grain. They had coined currency too. Take the Athenian drachma, a silver coin that was as iconic as the Parthenon. It wasn't just currency. It was a statement of Athenian power, minted from silver mined in Laurium, which conveniently also funded their formidable navy. You could say the city-state's economic strategy was silver in, ships out. But the true cost of this silver rush was paid by the laborers, often enslaved, who toiled in the mines under brutal conditions. Forget the romantic notion of treasure chests overflowing with coins. The reality was grueling labor that kept the Athenian economy afloat. The Romans, on the other hand, had the denarius, a small silver coin that jangled in the pockets of legionnaires and merchants alike. Its value wasn't just in the silver, but in the trust it represented, an early form of fiat currency, if you will. Yet, the Roman economy wasn't immune to inflation. As emperors debased the coinage, reducing the silver content to finance their lavish lifestyles and endless wars, the denarius went from being a symbol of stability to a devalued relic. It's almost like the ancient version of quantitative easing, but with more sword fights and less economic jargon. And speaking of sword fights, let's not ignore the military's role in these ancient economies. Armies weren't just for conquering territories, they were major economic players. Roman soldiers, for instance, were paid in salt, hence the term salary, and their deployment in far-flung regions often spurred local economies. Military campaigns could make or break an empire's finances, with the costs of conquest sometimes outweighing the spoils. It was a delicate balance of power, prestige, and cold, hard cash. Beyond the battlefields and bustling trade routes, agriculture was the backbone of ancient economies. But farming wasn't the idyllic pastoral scene you might imagine. A bad harvest could send a society reeling. In ancient Egypt, the Nile's annual inundation was both a blessing and a curse. A high flood meant fertile fields and bountiful harvests, but a low flood could spell disaster, leading to famine and social unrest. It was a high-stakes game of natural roulette, one the Egyptians played year after year. In Rome, the countryside was dotted with latifundia, sprawling estates that were the agricultural powerhouses of the empire. These weren't quaint family farms, but industrial-scale operations run by slave labor. The Roman elite grew rich off the sweat and toil of others, their wealth as tied to the soil as the roots of the olive trees they harvested. The economic disparity was stark, with small farmers often losing their land to these massive estates, a tale as old as time and as modern as a foreclosure crisis. Yet, despite these harsh realities, the allure of ancient wealth and power still captivates us. We romanticize the opulence without acknowledging the cost. The pyramids, the Parthenon, the Colosseum, these weren't just monuments to human achievement, but testaments to economic ambition and exploitation. Behind every gleaming structure was a story of labor, sacrifice, and survival. In the end, the ancient world was an economic tapestry woven from threads of ambition, resourcefulness, and a fair amount of luck. It was a world where fortunes could rise and fall with the tide, where trade routes were the lifelines of civilization, and where the true cost of living was measured not in gold, but in human endurance. As we peel back the layers of history, we uncover not a simple tale of wealth and glory, but a complex narrative of economic interdependence and the eternal quest for prosperity. As we prepare to delve deeper into the intricate dance of ancient economies, remember this. Behind every coin, every trade caravan, and every harvest lay a story of people striving to make their mark in a world as unpredictable as it was interconnected. The echoes of their struggles and triumphs continue to resonate, challenging us to look beyond the myths and find the humanity in history's grand stage. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel these tales of old, where each chapter reveals a new piece of the puzzle in our shared human story. As we transition from the economic intricacies that kept ancient societies ticking to the bloodier pursuits that often unraveled them, let's wade into the ancient military-industrial complex, where ambition met armament, and both often ended up in a ditch somewhere. War, the original national pastime, and just like today, it was an expensive, brutal affair that sometimes seemed about as necessary as a screen door on a submarine. Take the legendary Trojan War, for instance. Was it really about Helen, the so-called face that launched 1,000 ships? Or was she just the ancient world's equivalent of a clickbait headline? For 10 years, the Greeks laid siege to Troy, a city whose historical existence was debated until archaeologists unearthed its ruins in what's now Turkey. Yet behind the romance of Helen and Paris was a strategic interest in controlling the trade routes that passed through the Dardanelles. So, while poets like Homer waxed lyrical about love and betrayal, the real drama was likely about who got to control the toll booth on the ancient highway of commerce. Then there's the Persian Wars, where the Greeks faced off against a seemingly unstoppable Persian empire. Xerxes led an invasion force in 480 BC that historians estimate to have been anywhere from 70,000 to 300,000 strong. Think of it as the ancient version of a road trip gone wrong, with logistics that would make even the most patient quartermaster weep. Just imagine trying to coordinate a multi-ethnic army across hundreds of miles without GPS, facing supply chain issues that would make today's shortages look like a minor inconvenience. The Battle of Thermopylae is a standout in this saga, immortalized by the heroic last stand of 300 Spartans, along with a few thousand other Greeks who don't get nearly enough credit. While Leonidas and his band of warriors are celebrated for their bravery, the reality was far grittier. They were quite literally the speed bump in the Persian juggernaut's path, buying time for the rest of Greece to organize. Despite the romantic tales of valor, the battle was a strategic delay tactic, a desperate bid to slow the Persian advance. And yes, it was a defeat, but it set the stage for eventual Greek victory at Salamis and Plataea, where the tide of war turned like a well-played chess game. Now, before you get too swept up in the heroics, let's talk about the economic underpinnings of these conflicts. War wasn't just a matter of pride or revenge. It was big business. Armies needed food, weapons, and pay, and funding these military endeavors was no small feat. The Athenians famously tapped into their silver reserves at Laurium to fund their navy, an investment that would pay off during the naval battle of Salamis. They knew that victory at sea was as much about having the resources to build and maintain a fleet as it was about strategy. Jumping over to Rome, their military machine was a well-oiled juggernaut that evolved into an empire-spanning complex. Roman legions were the ancient world's equivalent of a global brand, known for their discipline and efficiency. But behind the gleaming armor and impressive formations lay a logistical nightmare. The Roman army was a devourer of resources, requiring tons of grain and supplies daily. Imagine the military equivalent of a Black Friday sale, where everything from boots to bread needed restocking on a colossal scale. In these campaigns, the economics of war were ever present. The spoils of conquest were a quick way to refill the coffers, but more often than not, war was a financial black hole. The cost of maintaining an empire was vast, with Roman generals and politicians constantly juggling the books to keep their military endeavors afloat. These challenges were further compounded by the need to pay and placate legions stationed across vast territories, ensuring they remained loyal to Rome rather than the highest bidder. And what about the political landscapes these wars shaped? The Persian Wars not only fortified Greek identity, but also led to the rise of Athens as a major power, ushering in the golden age of Pericles. Yet it also sowed the seeds of rivalry with Sparta, culminating in the Peloponnesian War, a classic case of two powerhouses butting heads until both were left battered and bruised. Rome, on the other hand, found that military conquest was both a blessing and a curse. As they expanded, they encountered new cultures and adopted new gods and customs, weaving them into the Roman tapestry. But this expansion also stretched resources thin, and with each new province came the headache of administration and defense. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire would eventually contribute to Rome's fall, as overextended borders and internal strife slowly eroded their power. Through these tales of conquest and chaos, we see a recurring theme. War might have been glorified by poets and politicians, but on the ground, it was a gritty, costly affair that reshaped societies in its wake. The ancients might not have had drones or digital warfare, but their battles were no less complex, with strategies as intricate as any modern military campaign. So, as we wrap up this dive into the ancient military-industrial complex, remember that behind every myth of heroism was a reality of hardship. War was as much about logistics and economics as it was about glory and valor. And as we continue to explore these legacies in the upcoming parts, we'll see how these ancient conflicts continue to echo in our modern world, a testament to the enduring nature of human ambition and folly. Stay tuned for more as we keep unraveling the threads of history, where each battle, each decision, and each economic gamble left a mark that resonates through the ages. We're not done yet. There's plenty more to uncover in the saga of our ancient ancestors. At this point, it's tempting to think of history as a dusty tome of old tales told by grandpas with too much time on their hands. But hold onto your helmets, because the truth is far more intriguing. History isn't just a collection of dates and dead people. It's the grand soap opera of human existence, complete with plot twists that would make even the most seasoned screenwriter blush. Let's dive into the unexpected ways ancient civilizations continue to shape the world today. For starters, consider democracy, a concept we often associate with the modern world, but one that has roots deep in ancient Greece. Sure, the Athenian version was more exclusive than an invite-only club, with citizenship limited to free-born males who had completed military training. But the idea that people could have a say in their governance was revolutionary. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of this ancient system in governments around the globe. We've expanded the club, of course, though the challenges of ensuring true representation remain as complex as the Parthenon friezes. Meanwhile, Rome's legal legacy is a gift that keeps on giving. Ever had to deal with a contract? You can thank Roman law for that. The 12 Tables, Rome's ancient legal code, laid the groundwork for modern legal systems. While the Romans were busy codifying laws, they were also pioneering infrastructure that would make modern urban planners swoon. Their roads, aqueducts, and city layouts were so well crafted that some still serve as the backbone of cities today. Talk about a long-lasting impact. Those Roman engineers knew how to lay down the law and the road. But let's debunk a myth or two. Take the idea that all roads lead to Rome, an expression that conjures images of pristine Roman highways connecting an empire. The reality, ancient travel was more Oregon Trail than Autobahn. Sure, the roads were an engineering marvel, but they were also fraught with peril, from bandits to bad weather. Yet these routes were vital arteries that connected disparate parts of the empire, facilitating trade and cultural exchange. Today, the notion of interconnectedness has evolved, but the spirit of Roman roads lives on in our globalized world, where ideas and goods travel faster than ever. Speaking of trade, the ancient Silk Road was the OG global marketplace. This sprawling network wasn't just about swapping silk for silver. It was a highway for cultural exchange. From spices to stories, the Silk Road was a melting pot where East met West long before globalization became a buzzword. The legacy is palpable in our multicultural societies today, where diverse influences blend to create something richer and more complex. Yet, let's not romanticize the journey. Merchants faced dangers that would make an action hero sweat. But their bravery and tenacity laid the groundwork for centuries of cross-cultural dialogue. Now, let's turn our attention to the pyramids, those colossal stone triangles that scream ancient Egypt, louder than a Nile crocodile. We've all heard the romantic tales of pharaohs and mummies, but the true legacy of these structures is their demonstration of human ambition and resourcefulness. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were statements of power and permanence. Today, they stand as reminders of what humans can achieve when motivated by a potent mix of faith, fear, and a desire to be remembered. They challenge us to ponder our own legacies. What will we leave behind for future generations to puzzle over? And speaking of legacies, the ancient world was a crucible for scientific and philosophical thought that continues to influence us. Take the Greeks and their obsession with the stars. While they didn't have smartphones to point at the sky, they laid the foundations for astronomy, a field that still captures our imaginations today. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle didn't just ponder abstract questions over a glass of wine. They grappled with the human condition, leaving behind ideas that underpin much of Western thought. Their musings on ethics, politics, and the nature of knowledge are as relevant now as they were in the Agora. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of the past. The ancient world was also rife with inequality, a reality that remains a stubborn spectre today. From the slaves who built Rome's monuments to the laborers who toiled in Athens' silver mines, history is a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy. These stories remind us that progress is neither linear nor guaranteed. It requires vigilance and a willingness to learn from past mistakes. Just as the ancients grappled with power dynamics and social justice, so must we continue the struggle to create a more equitable world. So, as we draw this historical journey to a close, let's reflect on what we've uncovered. A world where ambition drove innovation, where power was both a tool and a trap, and where the past continues to echo in our present. History is a mirror reflecting not just where we've been but also where we're headed. It's a story of humanity in all its messy, magnificent glory. Remember, the next time you marvel at a skyscraper or debate a philosophical quandary, You're standing on the shoulders of giants, reaching for the stars. In the end, history isn't just about avoiding the pitfalls of the past. It's about understanding the quirky, complex human story that got us here. It's the ultimate reality show, full of drama, intrigue, and the occasional plot twist. So the next time someone tells you history is just a dull recounting of dates, you can confidently reply, "Not on my watch." Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that the past is anything but boring. It's the blueprint for everything that follows. The Egyptian pyramids, those iconic triangles of stone that scream mystery, mastery, and a fair bit of sand in your sandals. But let's pause the Hollywood soundtrack for a moment and dive into what really went down when these mammoth structures were born out of the desert. Spoiler alert, it's less about alien architects and more about a society built on the backs of its people, fueled by a surprising economy that revolved around the most ancient of brews. Yes, folks, beer wasn't just for getting through a rough day. It was practically the currency of choice. So, kicking things off, let's debunk the age-old myth that the pyramids were just fancy tombstones for the egotistical whims of pharaohs. Sure, they did end up as the final resting places for a select few, but their construction was more of a political flex than a cozy afterlife condo. Think of the pyramids as the ultimate status symbol, akin to owning a luxury yacht today, only with more limestone and less sea breeze. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was erected around 2560 BC during Pharaoh Khufu's reign, standing tall at a staggering 481 feet. That's roughly the height of a modern 40-story building, minus the elevators. Now, onto the workforce. Forget about slaves dragging boulders in loincloths, whipped into submission by tyrannical masters. Recent archaeological digs suggest these grand edifices were built by a skilled workforce, possibly the ancient equivalent of a well-fed construction crew. Estimates put this team of pyramid builders at around 20,000 to 30,000 men. These weren't slaves, but rather laborers who were paid for their efforts, not in cold, hard cash, but in the liquid gold of the time, beer. Each worker was entitled to a daily ration, with records indicating they guzzled down about 4 to 5 liters per day, enough to make a frat party look like a tea social. The logistics of this operation were nothing short of a logistical nightmare. Just ask any ancient Egyptian project manager. The materials alone were mind-boggling. For the Great Pyramid, approximately 3 million blocks of stone were hauled into place, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons. That's like moving several dozen elephants, one block at a time, without the help of modern machinery. The quarrying, transporting, and assembling of these stones required a level of precision and coordination that would make today's project managers break out in a cold sweat. It's a testament to human ingenuity, or sheer stubbornness, that they managed to pull it off. In terms of costs, while there's no ancient equivalent of a price tag dangling from Khufu's pyramid, we can infer the economic impact was colossal. The sheer manpower required, coupled with the daily beer rations and food provisions, represented a significant investment by the state. This wasn't just an exercise in grandeur, but a deliberate move to centralize power and demonstrate the pharaoh's divine right to rule. The pyramids were propaganda in stone, a message carved into the skyline that screamed, "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." Besides the economics, the social implications were equally profound. The construction of the pyramids played a crucial role in the pharaoh's ability to consolidate power over their subjects. It wasn't just about building structures, it was about building a civilization. By employing thousands and feeding them with the state's resources, the pharaohs effectively nurtured a bond of loyalty and dependence. It's a bit like a medieval king throwing a massive festival. Only this one lasted decades and involved moving mountains, literally. So, while the romantic notion of the pyramids as ethereal gateways to the afterlife persists, the reality was far more grounded. They were the ultimate expressions of power, authority, and economic might, built by a workforce that was both well-fed and well-bearded. These ancient wonders weren't just about resting places for kings. They were towering reminders of a society's ability to dream big, build bigger, and keep the brew flowing. In the end, the pyramids stand as eternal monuments not just to the pharaohs, but to the indomitable spirit of human endeavor. And if that doesn't leave you feeling a little more connected to those ancient workers, I don't know what will. And speaking of societies dreaming big, let's hop across the Mediterranean to ancient Greece, where dreams weren't just grand. They were practically philosophical treatises. Forget the image of Greeks lounging around in togas, pondering life's mysteries. They were busy building bustling markets, trading everything from olive oil to ideas, and inventing democracy as if it were a new app that would change the world. The Greeks were the original multitaskers, balancing the art of rhetoric with the fine art of commerce, and all without the help of a Wi-Fi connection. Let's start in Athens, the beating heart of ancient Greece, where the economy was as dynamic as one of those lively debates in the Agora. Athenian trade was the lifeblood of the city, and it pulsed through the Agora, the marketplace that was less about buying groceries and more about sealing trade deals and occasionally a bit of gossip. Picture it as the Wall Street of its day, but with more marble columns and fewer suits. Goods flowed through Athens like the endless streams of philosophical thought. Grain from Egypt, precious metals from Persia, and the finest wines that would make even Dionysus raise a glass. The Athenian economy wasn't just about trading trinkets. It was a complex dance of imports and exports, taxes and tariffs. Silver, mined from nearby Laurium, was Athens' secret weapon. Think of it as their Silicon Valley, the resource that powered everything from public works to their formidable navy. And let's not forget the currency. The Athenian drachma, a silver coin that was the Bitcoin of its time, accepted from the shores of the Aegean to the bustling markets of Asia Minor. Running a city-state like Athens wasn't cheap, and this is where things get interesting. The annual cost of maintaining Athens' military might and civic infrastructure was astronomical. We're talking around 1,000 talents a year, which would be roughly equivalent to $200 million today. The Parthenon didn't just spring up overnight. It was a multi-million-dollar venture, funded by tributes from allied states and occasionally a bit of creative bookkeeping. Yes, the Athenians were masters of financial wizardry, juggling civic projects and military campaigns while keeping the populace entertained with theatrical productions and public festivals. Pericles, Athens' most famous statesman, was the Steve Jobs of his day, orchestrating public spending with an eye for grandeur and a knack for persuasion. But let's not be wooed solely by the marble columns and the democratic ideals. The reality was that Athenian democracy was a bit like an exclusive club with a very selective membership policy. Women, slaves, and foreigners, basically the majority of the population, were left out of the voting process. It was democracy for the few by the few, and as long as you were a free male citizen, you had a voice. The rest, well, they were more likely to be seen serving wine at the symposium than participating in political debates. Now about those philosophers. Socrates, the quintessential Athenian gadfly, was the original social media troll, poking holes in the status quo and questioning everything, much to the chagrin of the Athenian elite. He didn't just sit in an armchair contemplating the universe. He was out in the streets, engaging in dialogues that were akin to today's viral debates. The Socratic method was less a teaching tool and more a philosophical roast, where no idea was safe from scrutiny. His relentless questioning was the ancient version of a Twitter thread gone viral, challenging the norms and often landing him in hot water with authorities who preferred their citizens a little less inquisitive. Socrates' trial in 399 BC was a spectacle of its own, a clash between the philosopher and the conservative elements of Athens who accused him of corrupting the youth, arguably the oldest excuse in the book. It was a dramatic courtroom drama that would rival any modern-day legal thriller, with Socrates defending his life's work with wit and irony, ultimately choosing death over exile. His execution was a sobering reminder that even in the cradle of democracy, dissenting voices could be silenced with a cup of hemlock and a jury's vote. Despite its flaws, Athenian democracy was a radical experiment. a bold statement in a world where monarchs and tyrants ruled with iron fists. It was a system that valued debate, celebrated public discourse, and most importantly, recognized the power of the collective voice, even if it was a limited chorus. Athens wasn't just a city of philosophers and warriors. It was a vibrant hub of commercial activity, where ideas were traded as freely as goods. It was a place where the seeds of Western civilization were sown, nurtured by the exchange of thoughts and the clink of coins in the marketplace. As we wrap up this leg of our Mediterranean journey, it's clear that ancient Greece was more than a collection of myths and marble statues. It was a society that thrived on the interplay of commerce and philosophy, where the agora was as crucial as the Acropolis. And while the romantic image of toga-clad thinkers pensively strolling under olive trees endures, the reality was far more dynamic. It was a world of traders and thinkers, where the lines between economics and ideology blurred into a vivid tapestry that still resonates today. Stay tuned as we continue our historical voyage, diving deeper into the fascinating world of ancient Greece and beyond. And speaking of vibrant hubs, let's flip our historical GPS from Athens to Rome, the ultimate powerhouse of the ancient world where ambition was as common as togas and as intoxicating as a goblet of Falernian wine. Welcome to the Roman Empire, folks, a place where politics played out like a never-ending season of Survivor, complete with backstabbing, alliances, and the occasional public spectacle. Now, if you thought maintaining an empire was just about lounging around in marble palaces, think again. This was a logistical monster that would make even the most seasoned project manager weep into their spreadsheets. At its peak, the Roman Empire sprawled across 3 continents, covering 5 million square kilometers. That's roughly the size of the United States and Mexico combined. Imagine trying to govern a landmass that stretches from the sun-drenched shores of Spain to the foggy moors of Britain and all the way to the sands of Syria. It's not just about issuing decrees. It's about keeping the wheels of bureaucracy well-oiled and the legions marching in time. Let's talk numbers. The cost of keeping the empire afloat was astronomical. We're talking around 1 billion sestertii a year. Think about $10 billion in today's cash. A significant chunk of that was spent on the military. Rome's legions weren't just about flexing muscles. They were the backbone of the empire's security and expansion. Maintaining these forces was akin to running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Soldiers weren't just handed spears and told to get on with it. They received regular salaries, a retirement package, and even land grants upon discharge. It was a career with benefits, minus the casual Fridays. And here's the kicker. To fund this colossal human and economic machinery, Rome leaned heavily on taxes. Each province was like a piggy bank, and Roman officials had the key. The tax burden on these provinces was intense, to say the least. Picture a scenario where the tax collector is less a friendly accountant and more a shark in a toga, circling for any sign of financial weakness. Failure to pay could lead to severe penalties or outright confiscation of property. Not exactly the kind of tax season reminder you want popping up in your inbox. But hey, let's not forget the bread and circuses, a phrase that wasn't just metaphorical. The gladiatorial games were Rome's version of prime-time TV, with a dash more blood and a lot less commercial breaks. These spectacles were both entertainment and a shrewd political tool. Held in massive arenas like the Colosseum, which could seat around 50,000 spectators, these games were designed to placate the masses and distract them from the empire's mounting issues. It was a bit like giving everyone a free Netflix subscription to keep them from noticing the potholes in their roads. Gladiators, often slaves or condemned criminals, became the superstars of their day, fighting to the death for the amusement of the public and the glory of the emperor. Speaking of roads, let's hit the proverbial pavement and talk about Rome's legendary infrastructure. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just catchy, it was a literal truth. The Romans constructed over 400,000 kilometers of roads, 80,000 of which were paved. These weren't your average dirt tracks. They were engineering marvels, designed to last and facilitate the swift movement of troops, trade, and information. Roads were the internet cables of the ancient world, connecting the far-flung corners of the empire with the speed of a chariot. And thanks to these highways, Rome could project its power and influence far and wide, knitting together a diverse empire with impressive efficiency. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these cobbled wonders. The construction and maintenance of such extensive infrastructure were expensive, and it was the provinces that often footed the bill. The burden of building these roads often fell on local populations, who were expected to provide both labor and materials. It was a case of top-down management, where the benefits flowed upward while the hard work remained at the bottom. For the average Roman citizen, these roads were both a blessing and a burden, a testament to Rome's might and a reminder of its demands. So, while the romantic image of Rome as a city of marble and glory persists, the reality was far more complex. It was a society built on the backs of its provinces, fueled by a relentless demand for resources and a talent for organization that kept the imperial machine humming. The empire was a balancing act of power, politics, and pragmatism, where the stakes were high and the costs even higher. And as we dig deeper into the Roman world, we'll uncover more about how this ancient juggernaut managed to stay on top for so long, even as the cracks in its facade began to show. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the story of Rome, where every stone tells a story, and every road leads to the heart of an empire. As we step off the Roman roads and into the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, let's talk about the ancient Mayans, a civilization that can make your head spin faster than their intricate calendar system. These folks didn't just gaze at the stars for fun. They turned celestial movements into a science long before we had telescopes or space agencies. Forget the trope of the Mayans as mystical doomsday prophets. They were more like ancient data analysts with a knack for numbers and a penchant for pyramids. First off, let's clear the cosmic dust. The Mayans were not just a bunch of starry-eyed dreamers predicting apocalypses. Sure, their calendar got a lot of press in 2012, but newsflash, it never actually predicted the end of the world. What it did do was track time with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. The Mayans developed a calendar system that combined a 365-day solar calendar with a 260-day ritual calendar, creating a cycle known as the calendar round. This system could accurately predict solar eclipses, planetary movements, and even the best days to plant crops. Not too shabby for a civilization without Google Calendar, but it wasn't all about watching the skies. The Mayans were also masters of mathematics, and they weren't just counting coconuts. They introduced the concept of zero long before it was cool, around the 4th century AD to be precise, making them one of the first civilizations to do so. This was a game changer, allowing them to perform complex calculations that were crucial for everything from architecture to agriculture. It's like they were running their own version of ancient STEM classes, minus the student loans. Now, speaking of architecture, let's address those iconic Mayan pyramids. While they might not have been as tall as their Egyptian counterparts, what they lacked in height, they made up for in design complexity. Consider El Castillo at Chichen Itza, which isn't just a stone structure, but a giant solar calendar. During the equinoxes, the play of light and shadow creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down the pyramid steps, a testament to the Mayans' astronomical and architectural prowess. It's like they were starring in their own ancient version of Architectural Digest, impressing everyone with their blend of artistry and engineering. But let's not get too starry-eyed about their achievements. The Mayans were also a society grappling with real-world challenges that would eventually contribute to their decline. Economic and environmental pressures played a significant role in the unraveling of their civilization. The collapse of the classic Mayan civilization around the 9th century AD wasn't due to some mystical vanishing act, but a complex mix of factors, including overpopulation, resource depletion, and climate change. It turns out that too many people and too few resources is a combo as volatile as chili peppers in a Mayan stew. The Mayans were primarily an agrarian society, heavily reliant on maize, beans, and squash. the holy trinity of Mesoamerican cuisine. But as their population boomed, so did the demand on their land. Deforestation became rampant, leading to soil exhaustion and a decline in agricultural productivity. It's a classic case of too much of a good thing, where expanding cities and farmland took a toll on the environment. The irony is, while they could predict celestial events with precision, predicting the long-term impact of their agricultural practices was another story. Then there's the issue of water, or the lack thereof. The Mayans lived in a region prone to droughts, and when the rains didn't come, it spelled disaster. Imagine trying to sustain large city-states like Tikal or Kapan without reliable water sources. It was a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned Roman aqueduct engineer break into a sweat. Reservoirs and water management systems were developed, but they weren't enough to stave off the relentless droughts that plagued the region. Politically, the Mayans were no strangers to conflict. Their city-states were often at odds, engaging in warfare that further strained resources. These weren't epic battles for world domination, but more like competitive sibling rivalries with serious consequences. Power struggles and shifting alliances were as common as the tropical rainstorms they hoped for. It's a stark reminder that, while the Mayans had their heads in the stars, their feet were firmly planted in the gritty realities of earthbound disputes. As we sift through the romanticized notions of the Mayans as mystical stargazers, it's crucial to remember that they were a society of remarkable achievements and formidable challenges. Their legacy isn't a tale of mystical disappearance, but a complex narrative of human ingenuity meeting environmental and social limits. So, the next time someone mentions the Mayan calendar, remember, it's not just a countdown to doom, but a testament to a civilization that reached for the stars while grappling with the very real problems of the Earth. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the ancient world, where every stone and star tells a story waiting to be decoded. And speaking of decoding stories written in stone and stars, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. From the towering pyramids of Egypt to the democratic dramas of Greece, the road-building Romans, and the stargazing Mayans, these ancient societies didn't just fold into history. They laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. Their legacies stretch far beyond myths and monuments, influencing everything from our economic systems to our political structures and cultural norms. It's like they left us a historical mixtape, and we're still playing the greatest hits. Let's start with the Egyptians, whose pyramids aren't just tourist magnets, but enduring symbols of human ambition and architectural genius. These structures, once thought to be the ultimate expression of divine power, have become icons of engineering prowess. The logistics of pyramid construction, moving millions of stones without modern machinery, speak to an organizational ability that echoes in today's large-scale projects. The Egyptian workforce, paid in beer and bread, might just be the ancient precursor to the modern-day salary. And while we can chuckle at the idea of a liquid paycheck, it underscores a sophisticated economic system where resources were centrally controlled and distributed, a model that has influenced state-run economies throughout history. Meanwhile, the Greeks gave us more than just philosophical ponderings and toga parties. They introduced democracy, a radical concept that has evolved but remains foundational to many modern governments. Sure, Athenian democracy had its flaws, like excluding women and slaves, but it was a start, a framework that inspired revolutions and reformations centuries later. The Athenian agora, bustling with trade and debate, laid the groundwork for the concept of a public sphere where ideas are exchanged and economies thrive. And while the modern stock exchange might have swapped marble columns for glass skyscrapers, the essence remains the same, a hub of commerce and conversation. Rome, the ultimate empire, gave us lessons in governance and infrastructure that are still relevant today. Their road networks weren't just about connecting cities. They were about connecting cultures, facilitating trade, and spreading ideas. The Roman legal system, with its emphasis on codified laws and rights, is a forerunner of contemporary legal frameworks. And let's not forget the concept of citizenship. which Rome expanded beyond its borders, setting a precedent for inclusive national identities. While Rome's penchant for bread and circuses might sound frivolous, it highlights the enduring need for governments to keep their citizens content, or at least distracted. Now, the Mayans might not have left us with a political system or a network of highways, but their contributions are no less significant. Their astronomical and mathematical achievements underscore the human capacity for scientific inquiry long before the age of technology. The Mayan calendar, a feat of precision, reflects an understanding of time and space that continues to intrigue scholars and laypeople alike. And while their civilization faced challenges that led to its decline, the lessons of environmental stewardship and sustainable resource management are more relevant than ever in our climate-conscious world. So why do these ancient legacies matter today? Because they remind us of the cost of greatness. The pyramids, temples, and roads came with a price tag, often paid in blood, sweat, and stone. They show us that human progress is not without its challenges, that every towering achievement is built on countless smaller sacrifices. These societies, with their grand ambitions and inevitable downfalls, teach us about resilience and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, power, and survival. The myths that surround these ancient civilizations, of pharaohs with divine power, democratic utopias, emperors with absolute control, and mystical calendars, endure because they capture our imagination. They offer a romanticized view that makes history feel larger than life. But beneath the myths lie the realities of human endeavor and the complexities of societal development. The appeal of these legends lies in their ability to inspire, even as we acknowledge the gritty truths beneath the surface. In the end, the legacies of these ancient societies are woven into the fabric of our modern world. They challenge us to look beyond the romantic narratives and appreciate the real stories of innovation, governance, and cultural exchange. As we ponder the true cost of greatness, we're reminded that history is not just about the past, but about understanding the present and shaping the future. And while we may not be building pyramids or conquering empires, the spirit of human ingenuity that drove these ancient peoples continues to shape our world today. So, the next time you marvel at a skyscraper or engage in a heated debate, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of giants, driven by the same desires and challenges that have defined humanity for millennia. In the grand tapestry of human history, the early cities of Mesopotamia are like the first bold stitches in what would become a very complex quilt. Around 4000 BC, when the rest of the world was still figuring out how to not trip over their own feet, the region known as the cradle of civilization was already busy flipping the switch from mere survival to actual thriving. Enter Uruk, a city that could easily be the poster child for ancient urban development. With a population of about 50,000 at its peak, Uruk was no small village. It was bustling with activity, innovation, and probably the odd ancient traffic jam involving donkeys and carts. Uruk wasn't just big, it was groundbreaking. Its residents were pioneers in the invention of writing, developing the cuneiform script. Before you roll your eyes thinking it was just another way to scribble grocery lists, consider this. Cuneiform was a game-changer for record-keeping and administration. It was like the original Excel spreadsheet, minus the endless tabs and formula errors. This script was etched into clay tablets, which were then baked to last, because nobody likes their vital records turning to mush in the rain. These tablets recorded everything from tax obligations to epic tales, and their durability means we still have thousands of them today. Now, speaking of taxes, let's talk about the economic engine that kept these early cities humming. Agriculture was the backbone of Mesopotamian society, but it wasn't just about planting seeds and hoping for the best. The people of Uruk were hardcore about their farming. They developed intricate irrigation systems that would make modern civil engineers nod in approval. By channeling water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they could coax crops from the land with an efficiency that would make even today's agribusiness giants take notes. Wheat and barley were the stars of their agricultural show, providing the nutritional backbone for the populace and the fodder for countless ancient beer recipes. Yes, they brewed beer, a fact that quite possibly makes them the most relatable ancient civilization. Trade was also a big deal. Mesopotamia wasn't exactly rich in natural resources like timber or stone, so they had to play nice with their neighbors. This meant establishing trade routes that stretched as far as the Indus Valley and Egypt. They swapped textiles and grains for copper, timber, and luxury goods. It was like the world's first free trade agreement, albeit one that involved a lot more donkey caravans and significantly fewer bureaucratic headaches. But before we get too dreamy-eyed about ancient trade deals, let's burst a few bubbles. Ancient life wasn't all about glorious temples and serene agricultural landscapes. Let's face reality. Life in Mesopotamia was tough. People worked hard, and they didn't have weekends off to binge-watch the latest series. The social structure was rigid, with a distinct hierarchy that placed priests and rulers at the top, while slaves and laborers toiled at the bottom. And speaking of rulers, these weren't your average benevolent leaders. They were often more concerned with maintaining power than with the welfare of their people, using organized religion as a tool for control. It wasn't all that different from a few modern political strategies, come to think of it. So, if you've ever thought ancient history was just about pyramids and pharaohs lounging around in lavish luxury, think again. Mesopotamia was anything but a leisurely stroll through the sands. It was a vibrant, complex society filled with innovation and hardship, where people navigated the challenges of urban life with all the determination of someone trying to find a parking spot at a busy mall on a Saturday. The myths might suggest a time of idyllic prosperity, but the reality was far more nuanced and gritty. And honestly, isn't that what makes history so fascinating? Just as Mesopotamia was getting its groove on across the sand-dusted horizon, ancient Egypt was orchestrating its own symphony of civilization, all thanks to their backstage pass to the Nile. This wasn't just a river, it was the VIP lounge of the ancient world, turning desert into a veritable Garden of Eden. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, its liquid gold. Without it, the region would be little more than a sweltering wasteland where even a cactus might think twice before setting down roots. Now, let's talk pyramids. Those geometric marvels that have inspired more conspiracy theories than a late-night internet deep dive. Spoiler alert, they weren't built by aliens or time travelers with a penchant for large-scale architecture. Nope, these were the brainchildren of human ambition and a whole lot of manpower. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance. This colossal structure, a testament to human perseverance, and let's face it, a bit of ego, was built around 2560 BC as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu. We're talking about 3 million blocks of limestone, each weighing as much as 80 elephants stacked in a trench coat. It's like ancient Legos for giants. But who were the hands that stacked these stones, you ask? Forget the idea of an enslaved mass toiling under the whip. Recent evidence suggests that the pyramid builders were actually a skilled labor force, ancient Egypt's version of contractors, if you will. They were well fed, housed in nearby barracks, and even had access to medical care. These weren't just weekend warriors, they were permanent staff. This workforce likely numbered around 20,000 to 30,000 at the pyramid's peak of construction. They weren't paid in gold or silver, but rather in a currency that truly mattered. Bread, beer, and sometimes, surprisingly, tax exemptions. Imagine telling your boss you'll finish the project in exchange for a year's worth of sandwiches and a beer tab. As majestic as the pyramids are, they were also monumental propaganda tools. Pharaohs were the original influencers, and the pyramids were their Instagram posts. Only instead of likes, they were looking for immortality. You see, ancient Egyptians were rather obsessed with the idea of the afterlife. They believed that life on Earth was merely a dress rehearsal for eternity, and the pharaoh's afterlife was the ultimate show. The pyramids were designed to ensure that the pharaohs could continue their kingly existence beyond the grave, complete with all the comforts they had enjoyed in life. That's where mummification comes in, a process that's less glamorous than Hollywood would have you believe. It involved pulling the brain out through the nostrils and stuffing the body with natron, a kind of ancient baking soda. If that doesn't make you rethink wanting to live forever, nothing will. While the ruling class was busy building their eternal resumes, the average Egyptian was just trying to make it through a lifetime of hard labor and regular floods. The annual flooding of the Nile, known as the inundation, was both a blessing and a curse. It enriched the soil, setting the stage for bountiful harvests, but it also meant that for a few months each year, farmers became temporary construction workers or laborers. This seasonal shift was crucial for pyramid-building projects, offering a labor force that might otherwise be idle. The Nile was the original multitasker, providing water, transportation, and a yearly reminder that nature, not man, ultimately held the reins. Yet life in ancient Egypt wasn't all about toil and the looming shadow of the pyramids. There was a rich tapestry of culture, religion, and daily life that went beyond serving the whims of the divine kings. While pharaohs were busy being the sun god's earthly representatives, Egyptians were crafting a society that was surprisingly egalitarian, at least by ancient standards. Women could own property, divorce their husbands, and even rule as pharaohs in some cases. Take Hatshepsut, for example, who ruled not as a queen but as a king, complete with a false beard and a penchant for building ambitious architectural projects. Talk about shattering ancient glass ceilings. Of course, it wasn't all gender equality and sunshine. The class divide was as pronounced as the Nile's floodplain, with a stark contrast between the opulent palaces of the elite and the modest homes of the working class. The pharaohs and their inner circle lived in luxury, surrounded by fine linens, elaborate jewelry, and enough cosmetics to rival a modern department store. Meanwhile, the common folk lived in mud-brick houses, their diets rich in bread, fish, and beer. Yes, beer again. It was a staple, safer than water, and a reliable source of calories. Forget wine and cheese. In Egypt, it was all about beer and bread. As we peel back the layers of time, it's clear that ancient Egypt was a world of contradictions, a place where divine kings walked the earth, yet lives were defined by the whims of a river. The pyramids stand as eternal monuments to human ambition, ingenuity, and the unyielding quest for immortality. And while the pharaohs immortalized themselves in stone, the true story of Egypt's greatness lies in the hands of the thousands who toiled under the desert sun, fueled by bread and beer, dreaming not of eternity, but of a better life in the here and now. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this ancient tapestry, one thread at a time. And speaking of ancient tapestries, let's pivot east to the fertile plains of the Indus Valley, where the Harappan civilization was crafting its own intricate weave of urban sophistication and mystery. Now, if you think the modern city grid is a genius of recent invention, think again. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were pulling off that organized vibe around 2500 BC, long before city planners had spreadsheets and zoning laws to lean on. These cities were laid out with a precision that would make a modern surveyor swoon, straight streets intersecting at right angles, like some divine game of tic-tac-toe. And let's not even get started on their drainage systems. Seriously, these folks were the ancient sanitation champions, with covered drains running alongside streets and even private homes linked to the public sewage lines. Eat your heart out, modern infrastructure. But what really puts the Harappans in a league of their own was their obsession with standardization. We're talking weights and measures so consistent you'd think they were auditioning for the Guinness World Records. They used uniform bricks to build their cities, with a standard size of 7x14x28 cm, a ratio that would make any architect's heart flutter. This level of standardization was like the ancient equivalent of ISO certification, ensuring that everything from construction to trade was as smooth as a well-oiled chariot wheel. Speaking of trade, the Harappans were no strangers to the economic hustle. Their civilization boasted extensive networks that stretched all the way to Mesopotamia and beyond. They traded everything from cotton textiles to the much-coveted lapis lazuli, a blue stone that was basically the ancient bling of the affluent. And they weren't just haggling in the bazaars. They were using standardized weights to ensure fairness. Picture it. Merchants with scales and stone weights, doing business with the kind of precision that would make a modern economist nod in approval. But here's where things take a twist worthy of a historical thriller. Despite their achievements, the Harappan civilization vanished around 1900 BC, leaving behind ruins and a lot of questions. Cue the conspiracy theories. Some folks might want to blame aliens or mysterious cataclysms, but let's stick to what's more grounded in reality. Archaeological evidence suggests that climate change and trade disruptions were likely the real culprits. The once bountiful Saraswati River dried up, and shifts in monsoon patterns turned fertile lands into arid stretches. It's like Mother Nature decided to pull the rug out from under them, and she didn't leave a forwarding address. Add to that the disruptions in trade networks, possibly due to political upheaval or natural disasters elsewhere, and you've got a recipe for societal decline. The Harappans, who thrived on trade and agriculture, found themselves in a precarious situation. Without the resources to support their urban population, the cities slowly emptied, like a party that had run out of snacks and drinks. People migrated to smaller settlements, adapting to new ways of life as they grappled with environmental challenges. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a gradual transition, a slow fade rather than a sudden blackout. Despite the mystery surrounding their disappearance, the Harappans left behind an enduring legacy. Their innovations in urban planning and sanitation were so ahead of their time that even today we can learn a thing or two from their city layouts. And let's not forget their cultural contributions. They developed a script that remains undeciphered to this day. It's like the ultimate ancient enigma, a puzzle that continues to intrigue historians and linguists alike. So, while the Harappans might not have left behind grand monuments like the pyramids, their story is an important chapter in the saga of human civilization. It's a reminder that progress is often built on the foundations laid by those who came before, even if their voices have faded into the echoes of time. As we continue our journey through the annals of history, let's keep the momentum going, unraveling the mysteries of the past one thread at a time. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll venture into the enigmatic world of the ancient Chinese dynasties, exploring their innovations and challenges in a landscape as complex as the Great Wall itself. As we pivot our historical magnifying glass eastward, we find ourselves stepping into the misty dawn of Chinese civilization during the Shang dynasty, circa 1600 BC. Picture a world where the writing was literally set in stone, or more accurately, etched into turtle shells and ox bones. These oracle bones are the earliest known examples of Chinese writing, offering us a fascinating glimpse into the lives of those ancient folks who, unlike us, didn't have the luxury of emojis to convey their emotions. Now, let's talk about these oracle bones. They weren't just casual doodle pads for ancient scribes. Oh no, these were serious business. Used in divination rituals, the bones were a hotline to the gods, a way for the ruling elite to ask burning questions about everything from the weather to military campaigns. You could say they were the original crystal ball, only with a bit more literal fire, as they were heated until they cracked, and the resulting fissures were interpreted for omens. Next time someone complains about their job, remind them it could be worse. They could be deciphering bone cracks for a living. The Shang dynasty wasn't just about mystical mumbo-jumbo, though. It was also a time of serious power plays and technological leaps. Enter bronze, the superstar metal of the era. If the Bronze Age had an Oscar ceremony, the Shang would definitely take home the award for best use of a metal. They crafted everything from weapons to ritual vessels, turning bronze into a symbol of both divine favor and earthly power. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of having the latest tech gadget, only instead of smartphones, it was bronze swords and chariots. Speaking of power, the Shang rulers knew how to wield it. They weren't just sitting around sipping tea and contemplating the cosmos. No, they were more like the CEOs of their time, building a centralized state that was both economically savvy and ruthlessly efficient. Their economy revolved around agriculture, with millet and rice as the staples, and they were masters at mobilizing labor for large-scale projects. The construction of city walls, for instance, was no small feat. We're talking about walls that could rival the Great Wall of China in their ambition, minus the tourists and souvenir shops. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of a perfect ancient society. The Shang dynasty was not all about innovation and prosperity. The rulers maintained control through a strict hierarchy, with a king at the top who was as much a religious figure as a political one. This dual role was handy for maintaining power because, let's face it, it's hard to argue with someone who claims to have a direct line to the gods. But the flip side, a society where stepping out of line could mean a swift trip from the palace to the afterlife. Now, while we're basking in the glow of Shang achievements, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, or rather, the dragon. I'm talking about the Xia dynasty, supposedly the first dynasty in Chinese history. The Xia is like that mysterious celebrity who's always talked about but never seen, an enigma wrapped in legend. Traditional accounts place the Xia between 2070 and 1600 BC, but here's the kicker. There's scant archaeological evidence to prove they ever existed. It's like trying to find Atlantis, only with fewer fish and more ancient texts. The Xia dynasty is romanticized as a golden age, a time when sage kings ruled with wisdom and virtue. But the reality might be less about sage kings and more about myth-making. Some historians suggest the Xia stories could have been concocted by later dynasties to legitimize their own rule by linking themselves to this legendary past. It's the ancient version of fake it till you make it, a narrative spun to create a sense of continuity and greatness. Yet, the lack of evidence doesn't mean we should dismiss the Xia entirely. Legends, after all, often have a kernel of truth. Maybe the Xia were a collection of tribal leaders who gradually coalesced into what would become the Shang dynasty. Or perhaps they were a convenient political invention used to fill the gaps in history. Either way, their story is a testament to the enduring power of myth in shaping our understanding of the past. As we sift through the layers of history, the Shang dynasty emerges as a pivotal period, a time when China was laying the groundwork for what would become one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. The oracle bones tell tales of kings and diviners, of battles fought and crops harvested, offering a window into a world both familiar and alien. And while the Xia remains a shadowy presence, it serves as a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. So, as we wrap up our journey through the ancient Chinese dawn, let's leave some room for mystery and imagination. After all, the past is a land of shadows and echoes, where every answer leads to more questions, and every myth holds a hint of truth. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the twists and turns of history, where the line between legend and reality is as thin as a Shang oracle bone. As we leave the enigmatic mists of ancient China behind, our historical compass swings us back to the shimmering azure of the Mediterranean Sea, where the Greeks and Romans were busy crafting the blueprint for Western civilization. Let's dive into this world from around 800 BC to AD 476, a time when democracy and empire building were all the rage, and slavery was, regrettably, the economic fuel that kept the ancient engine running. First stop, Athens, the birthplace of democracy. Now, before you start picturing toga-clad philosophers endlessly debating under olive trees, let's get real about what Athenian democracy actually entailed. Around 508 BC, Athens decided to shake things up with a system that would make any modern politician green with envy, or perhaps a little queasy. But here's the catch. This wasn't a democracy for everyone. Only male citizens over the age of 18 could vote, which meant about 40,000 out of a total population of 300,000 had a say. Women, slaves, and foreigners were left out of the political party, reminding us that even the most forward-thinking systems have their limitations. Despite its exclusivity, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It introduced the concept of citizens having a direct hand in their governance. No middlemen, just a lot of hands-up voting. This was participatory politics at its finest, or most chaotic, depending on how you view it. Imagine an assembly of thousands, gathered at the Pnyx Hill, debating everything from war strategies to public works. It was less the calm, rational discourse we might romanticize, and more a lively, sometimes raucous affair. Now, while Athens was busy experimenting with democracy, the city-state of Sparta was having none of it. Over in Sparta, life was all about discipline, military prowess, and let's be honest, a communal lifestyle that would make a boot camp look like a holiday resort. Spartan society was structured around the needs of its military, with boys starting their training at the tender age of 7. And yes, they were encouraged to steal food to learn stealth, but heaven help them if they got caught. It was the ultimate survival of the fittest, and in a way it worked. Sparta became a formidable military power that everyone thought twice about challenging. But wait, let's not get too misty-eyed about Spartan valor. Their society was underpinned by an underclass of helots, essentially state-owned serfs, who did all the nitty-gritty work, so the Spartan elite could focus on their abs and spears. The helots outnumbered the Spartans by a staggering ratio of about 7-1, which meant keeping them in line was a full-time job. It's a stark reminder that while Sparta might have been a warrior's paradise, it was also a place of harsh oppression. Now that we've got a taste of Greek dynamics, let's fast forward to the Roman Republic. Picture this. It's 509 BC, and Rome decides monarchies are so last century, opting instead for a republic. This was a system of checks and balances, with consuls, senators, and assemblies all jostling for power. The Roman Republic was a political balancing act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, where power was supposed to be shared and corruption was, well, an open secret. The Republic thrived on expansion, turning Rome from a small city-state into a sprawling powerhouse. By 264 BC, Rome had locked horns with Carthage in the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts that could put any blockbuster trilogy to shame. After nearly a century of on-and-off fighting, Hannibal's elephants, and a lot of naval battles, Rome emerged victorious, solidifying its status as the dominant force in the Mediterranean. But as with any good epic, the Republic's success sowed the seeds of its own downfall. Enter Julius Caesar, the man who needs no introduction. By 44 BC, Caesar had declared himself dictator for life, a title that lasted precisely until he was assassinated on the Ides of March. His death marked the end of the Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire, ushered in by his adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus. The empire was a beast of a different stripe, centralized and autocratic, yet still reliant on the bones of the Republic. Speaking of bones, let's talk about what really underpinned both Greek and Roman societies: slavery. The backbone of the economy, slavery was as entrenched as olive oil in their diets. In Rome, slaves made up as much as 1/3 of the population, performing roles from household servants to laborers in the mines and fields. It was an institution that made the grand architecture and military conquests possible, but at a horrific human cost. And what about daily life? For all their grand achievements, both Greeks and Romans lived lives that were, for the most part, brutal and short. In Athens, the average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, with disease and war being ever-present spectres. In Rome, the situation was similar, although the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace, did offer a brief respite from constant conflict. Yet, amid the grime and grit, there was also glory. Athens gave us philosophy, drama, and art that still resonate today. The Acropolis stood as a testament to architectural brilliance, while the Parthenon remains an enduring symbol of classical beauty. Meanwhile, Rome's legacy is in its engineering feats. The Colosseum, aqueducts, and roads that stretched across continents, many of which are still in use today. As we wrap up this historical ride through the Mediterranean, it's clear that for all the myths of grandeur, the reality was often harsh and unforgiving. But it's precisely this complexity, the blend of triumph and toil, that makes these ancient societies endlessly fascinating. They laid the foundations for much of what we consider the hallmarks of Western civilization, from democratic ideals and legal systems to engineering marvels and cultural achievements. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the stories of Athens and Rome swirl in your mind. Remember that the past isn't just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, folly, and resilience. And isn't that what makes history so captivating? It's a reminder of where we've been and a guide to where we might go, with all the twists and turns along the way. Sweet dreams of ancient worlds. In the grand tapestry of history, one imagines that the mighty Roman Empire would be celebrated for its grandiose architecture, or perhaps its impressive military conquests. Instead, let's take a moment to appreciate something truly peculiar: the Roman knack for turning even the most mundane bodily functions into a revenue stream. Yes, we're talking about the infamous urine tax, a fiscal policy that would have you raising your eyebrows and clutching your nose. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, didn't just see urine as a waste product. Oh no, they saw liquid gold. In a world without detergent, urine was a prized cleaning agent due to its high ammonia content. It was used in everything from laundering clothes to tanning leather. Imagine, if you will, a bustling city where folks would collect their household pee in jars, only to sell it to fullers, those industrious souls tasked with cleaning togas. Now that's a recycling system the modern world can only dream of. Enter Emperor Vespasian, the man who took one whiff of this untapped market and said, "Let's tax it." Around AD 70, he introduced the urine tax, or vectigal uriny, demonstrating that in Rome, no revenue stream was too small or too odorous to escape imperial attention. And while Vespasian's decision might seem bizarre, it was a savvy move to fill the empire's coffers post-Civil War. The empire was strapped for cash, and as they say, desperate times call for desperate measures, or in this case, desperate taxes. Tax collectors in ancient Rome were akin to today's parking enforcers, a necessary evil, but not exactly beloved by the public. They were often portrayed as greedy and unscrupulous, which, considering their role in collecting taxes on urine, seems both appropriate and oddly specific. These guys had to ensure that the fullers, the real heavyweights in the urine trade, paid their dues to the state. It's one thing to seize assets, but can you imagine the social stigma of collecting on liquid deposits? The collectors probably needed a strong constitution and an even stronger perfume. Now, before you dismiss the Romans as eccentric tax enthusiasts, consider the practical implications. The urine tax wasn't just about raking in cash. It was a testament to the Roman Empire's sprawling economic complexity. This wasn't a one-off stunt, but part of a broader strategy that taxed everything from slaves to beehives. Even bachelors faced penalties for remaining unwed, a reminder that in Rome, even your love life was subject to taxation. The application of such taxes highlights the Roman approach to governance. Pragmatic, sometimes ruthless, but undeniably effective. These taxes funded public works, military campaigns, and the opulent lifestyles of the elite. It's a vivid illustration of how economics and politics were interwoven, with fiscal policy reflecting the priorities and pressures of the time. The urine tax also underscores the social hierarchy of Rome. While the elite might have sniffed at such practices, quite literally, the lower classes were the ones involved in the collection and trade. It was an industry of necessity, driven by the demands of the city's vast population. For the average Roman, selling urine wasn't just another day at the office. It was a means to survive in a city where the gap between the rich and poor was as wide as the Colosseum. As for Vespasian, his fiscal maneuvering left a lasting legacy. The public toilets in Rome, known as Vespasiani, were named in his honor, a fitting tribute to the emperor who saw opportunity where others saw waste. And when his son Titus questioned the morality of the urine tax, Vespasian famously held a coin to his son's nose, declaring, "Money does not stink," a phrase that would echo through the ages, much like the aroma of the Roman streets. So the next time you flush away what seems to be a mere waste product, remember the Romans, who found value in every drop. In their world, nothing was beyond the reach of taxation, and everything, from urine to honey, had its price. The ancient Romans, it seems, were the original masters of spin, turning even the humblest of waste into financial windfalls. As we delve deeper into the quirks and corners of ancient economic systems, one thing is clear. History, much like the Roman tax code, is full of surprises. In the grand theatre of ancient history, the Romans might have found gold in their chamber pots, but let's pivot to another civilization that also had quite the nose for peculiar practices. Ancient Egypt, a place where the Nile was not just a river but a lifeline, and the pyramids weren't just fancy tombs but status symbols that screamed, "I'm kind of a big deal." But today, we're not here to ogle at pharaohs or their extravagant afterlife plans. No, let's dig beneath the sand and explore the nitty-gritty of everyday life for the average Egyptian. Your typical jank, if you will. First off, let's set the scene. Forget the romanticized notion of everyone lounging on the banks of the Nile, fanning themselves with palm leaves. The social hierarchy was as rigid as the stone blocks of the pyramids themselves. At the top you had the pharaoh, whose word was law and who was considered a living god. Then came the priests, who were like the HR department of the divine, facilitating communication between the gods and the people. After them, the scribes and officials, who kept the bureaucracy ticking over like an ancient Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. But what about the janks of the world, the farmers, craftsmen, and laborers who formed the backbone of Egyptian society? These folks lived a life that was both brutally hard and surprisingly sophisticated. Picture a farmer waking up at dawn, ready to face the blazing sun and the fertile fields. Agriculture was king, thanks to the annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited nutrient-rich silt. This made for some of the most productive farmland in the ancient world, but it also meant that if the flood didn't come, you were in deep papyrus. Now, let's talk fashion, because the Egyptians had some pretty unique ideas about what constituted a killer look. For starters, both men and women wore makeup, not just because it looked fabulous, but because it served a practical purpose. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just a cosmetic choice, it helped protect their eyes from the harsh desert sun. Think of it as ancient Ray-Bans. And let's not forget the wigs. Yes, wigs. In a climate where lice were as common as sand grains, shaving your head and donning a wig was a pragmatic choice, not just a fashion statement. Plus, you could switch styles more often than a modern-day influencer. And while we're on the subject of personal grooming, the Egyptians were all about cleanliness. They took their hygiene seriously, so seriously that it sometimes sounds like a day at the spa. Daily bathing was a must, and they used a form of soap made from animal fat and chalk. Sounds a bit like artisanal soap, doesn't it? They also had their own version of deodorant, using concoctions made from citrus and cinnamon to keep the funk at bay. If only they'd had Instagram. Their #self-care Sunday posts would have been epic. But of course, no discussion of Egyptian culture would be complete without mentioning their obsession with cats. Cats weren't just pets. They were practically deified, associated with the goddess Bastet. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could land you in hot water faster than you could say meow. Cats were revered for their ability to deal with vermin, a crucial role in a society reliant on grain storage. It's as if every cat came with a built-in, ancient version of pest control software. Now, let's move on to one of the more, shall we say, acquired tastes of the Egyptian culinary scene, fermented fish. The dish in question, known as garum, was a staple. Imagine a fish sauce that had been left to ferment under the hot sun for months. Delicious, right? While it might sound like something you'd avoid at all costs, it was considered a delicacy. Garum was the ketchup of the ancient world, poured liberally over bread, meat, and vegetables. It's a testament to the fact that taste is relative. What's a pungent nightmare to one person is a gourmet delight to another. In terms of economic context, the average jank didn't have much in the way of disposable income. Barter was common, and taxes weren't paid in cash, but in goods or labor. The pharaoh's building projects, including those iconic pyramids, were financed by a labor tax. This meant that every so often, you'd find yourself drafted into a work gang, hauling limestone blocks under the blazing sun. Forget gym memberships. This was the original CrossFit. As we continue to peel back the layers of sand and time, it becomes clear that while the pharaohs may have had their names etched in stone, it was the common people who truly built Egypt. Their lives, though hard, were rich in culture and ingenuity. They balanced practicality with ritual, innovation with tradition, and somehow managed to do it all with a cat on their lap. So, the next time you're lounging in your air-conditioned home, remember the Janks, who lived by the ebb and flow of the Nile, and take a moment to appreciate the ancient world's contribution to our modern comforts. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover beneath the sands of time. All right, shifting gears from the land of pyramids and feline overlords to the bustling streets of ancient Athens, where democracy was born, or maybe stumbled into existence amidst a cacophony of voices. If you think your local town hall meetings get heated, you haven't seen the Athenian agora in full swing. Picture a place where politics was not just a matter of governance, but a full-contact sport. The Athenians didn't just vote. They vociferously argued, heckled, and sometimes even threw stones. Welcome to the birthplace of democracy, where shouting was practically a form of civic duty. In the 5th century BCE, Athens was the place to be if you fancied yourself a political enthusiast. But don't get too misty-eyed about this proto-democracy. It wasn't exactly the egalitarian utopia some would have you believe. For starters, out of a population of around 300,000, only about 30,000 were actually eligible to vote. Women, slaves, and foreigners, who constituted a significant chunk of the city, were politely shown the exit when it came to political participation. So, when we talk about Athenian democracy, let's be clear. It was a male, citizen-only club. The centerpiece of this democratic experiment was the assembly, or ecclesia, which met on the Pnyx Hill, an open-air auditorium that could accommodate about 6,000 citizens. Think of it as the world's rowdiest open mic night, where every male citizen over the age of 20 had the right to speak. The agenda was open, and the debates were anything but dull. Political orators had to be part philosopher, part stand-up comedian, and part gladiator to hold their own in this verbal battleground. And if you think modern politicians are theatrical, the Athenians took it to a whole new level. In a culture where rhetoric was king, persuasion often mattered more than policy. Now, let's talk strategy, because the Athenians had this down to an art. Ostracism, for instance, was the ultimate political excel, and it wasn't just a concept for ancient reality TV. Each year, citizens could vote to send one individual packing for 10 years, effectively neutralizing potential tyrants without the messy business of a trial. It was a preventative measure against political domination, a sort of don't let the door hit you on the way out, for those getting too big for their sandals. Names were scratched onto pottery shards known as ostraka, and the person with the most votes was shown the city gates. It was democracy's way of saying, "We love you, but not that much." Economically, this democratic system was supported by the contributions of its citizens. Public officials were often unpaid, and while this might sound noble, it also meant that only those with independent means could afford to serve. The wealthy elite, therefore, maintained a significant grip on power, ensuring that any radical redistribution of wealth or land was more fantasy than feasible. But Athens wasn't just about shouting and voting. It was also a city deeply invested in culture and education. The golden age of Pericles saw monumental building projects like the Parthenon rise up, funded by the Delian League's coffers. This was essentially an Athenian-led alliance of city-states that, while ostensibly formed to ward off Persian threats, operated more like a protection racket. Tribute flowed into Athens, underwriting its democratic institutions and cultural ambitions. The Athenians were masters of spin, portraying these funds as necessary for the greater good, while critics might have called it daylight robbery with a touch of marble. The Agora, Athens, bustling marketplace and political hub, was where democracy truly came alive. It was a melting pot of ideas, commerce, and gossip, a place where Socrates might have been seen pestering passers-by with his relentless questioning. Here, philosophy and politics intertwined, feeding off each other in a way that would shape Western thought for centuries. Yet beneath the intellectual veneer, the agora was also a place of economic necessity. Trade thrived, with merchants hawking everything from olive oil to pottery, ensuring that the wheels of commerce turned smoothly. This economic vitality was crucial. After all, a hungry populace is rarely a happy one. So, while we celebrate the ideals of Athenian democracy, let's not forget the gritty reality that underpinned it. This was a system that thrived on tension and conflict, where the line between debate and disorder was often razor-thin. It was messy, imperfect, and exclusive by today's standards, yet it laid the groundwork for the democratic principles we hold dear. The Athenians might have been chaotic, but they were nothing if not committed to their version of self-governance. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of democracy that, despite its flaws, this ancient system continues to inspire and inform our own political practices. As we delve further into this fascinating chapter of history, remember that the Athenian experiment was as much about human nature as it was about political theory. It was a test of whether a society could govern itself through reasoned debate rather than sheer force. And while the Athenians didn't always pass with flying colors, they undoubtedly set the stage for future generations to refine and expand upon their bold ideas. Stay tuned, because the next twist in this historical saga promises more intrigue, conflict, and perhaps a few more lessons in the art of statecraft. As we shift from the democratic chaos of Athens to the vast reaches of the Persian Empire, prepare yourself for a tale of grandeur and grit. The Persian Empire, under leaders like Cyrus the Great and Darius I, spanned 3 continents and included over 44% of the world's population around 500 BCE. Talk about a logistical nightmare. This was an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, and maintaining such a sprawling domain required more than just impressive maps and royal decrees. Now, if you've ever heard tales of the Persian army, you think they were the ancient world's equivalent of an unstoppable force. The imagery is vivid. Towering warriors, fearsome cavalry, and an endless sea of soldiers marching to the beat of a drum. But let's step off the chariot for a moment and take a closer look. The reality was often less invincible and more, well, inconvenient. Picture this. You're Darius I, and you've got a massive empire to protect and expand. But here's the catch. Mobilizing an army of hundreds of thousands isn't as glamorous as it sounds. Imagine the logistical conundrum of feeding such a horde. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of mouths, each requiring around 3,000 calories a day. That's a lot of kebabs and flatbread. And we're not even diving into the need for water, which was as crucial as it was scarce in many campaign regions. Feeding the army was just the beginning. There were also the beasts of burden, thousands of horses and camels, each with their own dietary requirements. It's a wonder they didn't just take up farming instead of fighting. And let's not forget the weaponry. The Persian army was famed for its archers, who could unleash a deadly rain of arrows. But those arrows didn't just grow on trees. Crafting and transporting them in bulk was a logistical feat that would leave even modern supply chain managers sweating bullets, or perhaps arrows. So, while the Persian army might have looked like an invincible juggernaut on a good day, the truth is that its strength was also its Achilles heel. The larger the army, the slower it moved, and the more resources it consumed. Supply lines stretched thin, and as any military historian will tell you, an army marches on its stomach. One broken supply line, one failed harvest along the way, and suddenly your invincible force is a starving mob. In warfare, as in life, the devil is in the details. And then there's the matter of communication. In an empire as vast as Persia, getting messages from one end to the other was like playing an ancient game of telephone, but with much higher stakes. The Persians weren't just playing at logistics, they were inventing it. The Royal Road, an ancient highway stretching over 1,600 miles, was their answer to the communication conundrum. It allowed for messages to traverse the empire in a mere week, thanks to a network of relay stations and fresh horses. Yet, even this marvel couldn't always keep pace with the rapidly changing tides of war. Now let's dispel another myth, the notion that the Persian army was a monolithic entity. In truth, it was a patchwork of various ethnic groups and cultures. From Medes to Egyptians, each contingent brought their own fighting styles and inevitably their own sets of headaches. While this diversity was a strength, offering a multitude of tactics and skills, it also brought about challenges in cohesion and command. Coordinating such a motley crew required the diplomatic skills of a seasoned negotiator and the patience of a saint. Consider the grand battles that have etched the Persian army into the annals of history. The Battle of Marathon, for example, is often portrayed as a near-miraculous victory for the Greeks against overwhelming odds. The truth is, the Persian army was stretched thin, dealing with an unexpected Greek assault while managing the logistical nightmare of their own supply issues. Not exactly the invincible force of legend, but rather a formidable adversary caught in a moment of vulnerability. So, why does the myth of the Persian army's infallibility persist? Well, there's an undeniable allure to the idea of an unbeatable foe, a Goliath to every David. It speaks to the human penchant for storytelling, where legends often overshadow the gritty reality. But as we peel back the layers of history, it's clear that the Persian Empire's true strength lay not just in its military might, but in its ability to manage the unwieldy beast that was its own army. In the end, the Persian military machine was as much about strategy and resources as it was about brute force. It was a testament to the empire's ambition and ingenuity, even if that meant dealing with the less glamorous side of warfare logistics. The story of the Persian army is a reminder that behind every epic narrative lies a reality that is both more mundane and more fascinating than fiction. As we continue this historical journey, remember that the allure of legend is only part of the story. The truth, as always, is a bit more complex and infinitely more interesting. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this unfolding saga, where we'll continue to unravel the tapestry of ancient might and mystery. Before we delve into the grand spectacle that is the ancient world's penchant for monumental architecture, let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. It's one thing to build a house, but another to construct a massive stone testament to ego and ambition that stands the test of time, literally. The ancient world was practically a global construction site, with rulers from China to Egypt flexing their architectural muscles like it was an Olympic sport. Take the Great Wall of China, for instance. Spanning over 13,000 miles, it's the longest man-made structure on Earth. But here's the kicker. The wall wasn't built in one go, nor was it a unified project. Constructed piecemeal over several dynasties, starting from as early as the 7th century BCE. It was less about keeping out invaders, and more about projecting power and control over the vast Chinese landscape. The wall was a stone and earth symbol of imperial might, but also a colossal headache for those tasked with building it. Laborers, often conscripted peasants, toiled under brutal conditions. It's estimated that hundreds of thousands of workers died during construction, their bodies entombed within the wall itself. A grim reminder that monumental architecture often came with monumental human costs. Then there are the Egyptian pyramids, those iconic geometric marvels that have captured the imagination of countless generations. While the pyramids are now synonymous with ancient Egypt, they were originally conceived as elaborate tombs for pharaohs who fancied themselves as gods. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed around 2500 and 82,560 BCE during the 4th dynasty for Pharaoh Khufu, stands as a testament to human ingenuity and, let's be honest, hubris. With a base spanning over 13 acres and originally towering at about 481 feet, it required an estimated 2-3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons. Imagine coordinating that without a single crane or forklift. Now, you might wonder, why go to such lengths for a tomb? In a society where the afterlife was as important, if not more so, than earthly existence, the pyramids were a pharaoh's eternal marketing campaign. They proclaimed, "I'm not just a king, I'm a god who will live forever." But the grandeur of these structures belied the harsh realities faced by those who built them. Contrary to popular myth, the pyramids weren't erected by slaves, but by a workforce of skilled laborers who were paid in bread, beer, and sometimes even meat. They lived in nearby workers' quarters, forming a community that thrived on the pharaoh's ambitious vision. Let's not forget the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, like the famous Etemenanki in Babylon, believed to have inspired the biblical Tower of Babel. These tiered structures served as temples and were often the centerpieces of their cities, towering over the landscape like ancient skyscrapers. The Etemenanki was said to reach 300 feet in height, a feat that required not just manpower, but also some serious architectural know-how. Built from sun-baked bricks, these ziggurats were less about touching the heavens and more about demonstrating the king's divine right to rule. Yet, as with other monumental projects, the glory of the ziggurat often came at the expense of the common laborer, toiling under the watchful eyes of overseers. But why this obsession with monumental architecture? At its core, these structures were about control, legacy, and sometimes sheer vanity. They were physical manifestations of power, designed to awe both contemporaries and future generations. It's a tale as old as time. Rulers seeking to immortalize themselves through stone and mortar, leaving behind legacies that would outlast their reigns and echo through history. The economic implications of these projects were immense. Funding such endeavors required a robust economy, often supported by taxes that could stretch a populace to its limits. The labor tax in Egypt, for instance, saw citizens contributing their time and effort to state projects, essentially making the pharaoh's ambitions a community affair. In China, the labor for the Great Wall came at the cost of agricultural productivity, as countless farmers were pulled from their fields to join the workforce. It's a classic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, but on a grand scale. Fast forward to today, and it's hard not to see the echoes of ancient ambition in our modern infrastructure projects. Skyscrapers reach for the sky, bridges span daunting chasms, and tunnels burrow through mountains, all in the name of progress and prestige. Yet, as in the past, these projects often come with significant economic and human costs. They serve as both a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of progress. In the end, the ancient world's monumental architecture leaves us with a mix of awe and incredulity. How did they achieve such feats with the limited technology of their time? And at what cost? These structures stand as silent witnesses to the ambition, innovation, and sometimes sheer madness of their creators. They remind us that while human nature may be prone to hubris, it is also capable of creating beauty that transcends time. So, as you wander through the ruins of ancient civilizations or marvel at modern marvels, take a moment to reflect on the legacy of monumental architecture. These structures are more than just stone and mortar. They're a testament to our enduring desire to leave a mark on the world, to be remembered long after we're gone. In the grand scheme of things, perhaps that's the most human impulse of all. When it comes to colossal blunders, the fall of the Roman Empire is like the Titanic of ancient history. Cue the dramatic music and the screams of terrified economists, because if you think modern inflation is bad, strap in for a ride through the Roman economic roller coaster. We're talking about an empire that stretched over 3 continents, with a population of about 70 million people, and an economy so vast and complex that it makes the New York Stock Exchange look like a lemonade stand. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to set the stage. Picture a society that once boasted roads longer than your average marathon, aqueducts that could quench the thirst of entire cities, and an army that made sure everyone knew Rome wasn't built in a day. But boy, could it fall apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The year is 476 AD, and the Western Roman Empire has just taken its final bow. Historians love to debate the reasons behind its collapse like it's a never-ending episode of Rome's Got Problems. Was it the barbarian invasions, the internal strife, or the economic missteps? Spoiler alert. It was all of the above, with a sprinkle of political chaos that makes modern-day politics look like a synchronized swimming event. Let's dive into the economic carnage first, shall we? Rome's financial system was as robust as a chocolate teapot. The empire's currency, the solidus, was initially made of gold, a reassuring promise of value. But as the empire expanded, so did its expenses. It needed more soldiers, more infrastructure, and unfortunately more money. So they began to debase the currency, reducing the gold content to stretch their finances. Imagine if your paycheck was suddenly 90% monopoly money. That's what Romans were dealing with. By the 3rd century, inflation had hit 1,000%, a number so staggering it could make a modern economist retire to a quiet life of gardening. The tax system was another masterpiece of chaos. Rome's tax collectors were less like civil servants and more like debt collectors with a penchant for creative accounting. Taxes were so high that sometimes citizens would flee their homes to avoid paying them. In some cases, entire towns were abandoned, turning bustling communities into ghost towns faster than you can say IRS audit. And then there were the political shenanigans. If you think today's political landscape is a mess, wait till you hear about Rome's revolving door of emperors. In the 3rd century alone, Rome went through 26 emperors in a span of 49 years. That's like changing a light bulb and finding out the fixture is broken. Emperors were assassinated, overthrown, or just plain vanished, leaving a power vacuum that was often filled by whoever could grab the nearest sword and shout the loudest. It was a Game of Thrones-level drama, minus the dragons, but with just as much bloodshed. Amidst all this chaos, the narrative of noble Roman generals fighting gallantly against barbarian hordes is a story that sells, like a summer blockbuster with plenty of CGI. But reality was less glamorous. The Roman legions, once the pride of the empire, were now a mix of mercenaries and soldiers who hadn't been paid in months. They were more likely to plunder a Roman village than defend it, a classic case of not biting the hand that feeds you unless it stops feeding you, in which case all bets are off. And speaking of those barbarian invaders, let's put a pin in that myth, shall we? While the term conjures images of wild-eyed warriors in animal skins, many of these groups were just trying to find a new home. The Visigoths, for instance, were initially allies of Rome before they were treated like unwanted houseguests. When they decided to sack Rome in 410 AD, it was less about destruction and more about getting what they were promised, food and security for their people. In the end, the fall of the Roman Empire wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a slow, painful unraveling. Economic mismanagement, political instability, and social upheaval created a perfect storm that even the most valiant of Rome's leaders couldn't navigate. The romanticized tales of heroism and noble sacrifice gloss over the gritty truth. Governing an empire is more about managing spreadsheets and less about charging into battle on horseback. And while the legends may capture our imagination, it's the harsh realities that teach us the most. So, the next time you hear about Rome's glorious past, remember the lessons hidden beneath the marble facade, because those who ignore history are doomed to repeat its most spectacular fails. Just when you thought empires were done imploding, let's hop on a time machine and steer it towards ancient Egypt, the land of the Nile, where the economy floated on water, literally. Forget the bling of the pyramids and the glamour of pharaohs. We're diving deep into the muddy waters of Nile River economics, slave labor, and bureaucratic headaches big enough to make a modern DMV look efficient. Picture the Nile not just as a river, but as the world's largest irrigation system and transport highway rolled into one. Its annual flooding was like nature's own version of a stimulus package. Every year, the banks would overflow, depositing rich silt that turned the land into fertile gold. This was the jackpot that allowed Egypt to sustain a population of around 5 million people at its peak. But before you imagine a utopia of idyllic farming scenes, let's talk about the hard graft behind the granaries. The whole operation was a well-oiled machine, or it would have been if oil existed back then. Instead, it ran on the sweat of slaves and workers who toiled under the relentless sun. These were the unsung heroes, minus the hero part, who made sure the pharaohs could build opulent tombs and commission grand statues without lifting a finger. The labor force wasn't just a ragtag bunch of whipped backs and dusty faces. It was organized chaos with a hierarchy as complex as a bureaucratic maze. Speaking of bureaucracies, Egypt's was a nightmare wrapped in papyrus. The state was a behemoth, employing scribes who kept records of everything from grain storage to workforce management. You've heard of pencil pushers. Well, these guys were the original Reed's stylus pushers. And let's not forget the tax collectors, Egypt's version of the Grim Reaper. They descended upon farmers demanding a share of the harvest with the kind of persistence that only a mother-in-law could rival. Now, onto the myths of those benevolent god-kings, the pharaohs. Sure, they were seen as divine, but let's peel back the gilded facade. These living gods were more like captains navigating a turbulent ship through political storms and courtly intrigue. Power struggles were a constant. Take Hatshepsut, for instance, who had to declare herself king. Yes, king, not queen, to secure her rule in a patriarchal world. She adorned her statues with the traditional false beard of a male pharaoh, proving that gender-bending in politics is nothing new. While the pharaohs were busy playing divine dress-up, the religious texts were having a moment of their own. Enter the Book of the Dead, ancient Egypt's answer to how to win friends and influence people, but with more mummies and heart-weighing ceremonies. This collection of spells and enchantments was basically a spiritual guide to navigating the afterlife. You could say it was the first self-help book, offering tips on how not to become a cautionary tale in the netherworld. Because who wouldn't want to avoid getting devoured by Amit, the soul-eating deity with the head of a crocodile and the backside of a hippo? On the surface, the pharaohs' divine status might look like a golden ticket to an easy life. But beneath the layers of linen and the scent of incense, there were power plays as cutthroat as a modern boardroom. The priests of Ammon, for instance, held sway like CEOs of a multinational corporation, controlling temples that were economic powerhouses in their own right. And when a pharaoh like Akhenaten tried to sideline the traditional gods for his own monotheistic agenda, let's just say the priests weren't thrilled about the corporate restructure. The romantic tales of grandiose temples and mighty monuments are the stuff of legend, but the reality, it's a tale of agricultural calendars, tax quotas, and a work ethic that would make a Silicon Valley startup blush. The Nile was the lifeblood, but it was the backs of countless workers that kept the heart of Egypt beating. While the pharaohs basked in divine glory, it was the men and women toiling in the fields and quarries who ensured the economy stayed afloat. In peeling back the layers of ancient Egypt, we find a society as complex and multifaceted as a pharaoh's sarcophagus. From the river that fed the nation to the bureaucratic spiderweb that entangled everyone from farmers to officials, it's a story of both splendor and struggle. So the next time you gaze in awe at the pyramids or marvel at the hieroglyphs, remember the gritty realities that built these wonders. Because while legends have their charm, it's the truth that leaves a lasting impression, and a more relatable one at that. And just like that, we're trading the sand of the Sahara for the silk of the Orient, journeying eastward to ancient China during the Han Dynasty, where innovation shook hands with bureaucracy in a dance as complex as the Great Wall itself. The Han Dynasty, stretching from 206 BC to 220 AD, was a period of prosperity and innovation that saw China expanding both territorially and intellectually. This wasn't your average dynasty. It was the Golden Age that made the Roman Empire look like it was still figuring out fire. Let's start with one of the Han Dynasty's most significant contributions to global history, the Silk Road. If you've ever wondered how a humble silkworm could spin a thread that would weave together continents, you're in the right place. The Silk Road wasn't just a single path, but a sprawling network of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles, connecting China with the Mediterranean. Picture a transcontinental highway, but instead of gas stations, you've got bustling caravanserais filled with merchants trading silk, spices, and enough exotic goods to make a modern shopping mall look like a garage sale. The economic impact of this ancient superhighway was monumental. Silk, the dynasty's crowning export, became the luxury item du jour in Rome, where senators would drape themselves in it like kids with a new toy. And it wasn't just silk that was on the move. Jade, paper, gunpowder, and even ideas like Buddhism traveled these routes, turning the Silk Road into a cultural exchange program centuries before anyone thought of student visas. The trade not only filled the Han coffers with wealth, but also helped bridge disparate cultures, laying the groundwork for globalization long before that became a buzzword. But hold onto your hats, because while trade was booming, the Han administration was wrestling with challenges that make modern bureaucracy look like child's play. The Han government was a colossal machine, with an administrative system as intricate as a Swiss watch. At its core was a complex bureaucracy that employed an army of officials, all appointed based on merit. Yes, you heard right, merit. These guys were the ancient version of civil service exams, ensuring that the most qualified were running the show. But here's the kicker. Even with this system in place, the bureaucracy often resembled a game of telephone, where messages got so garbled that what started as collect taxes ended up as build another palace. To make matters more interesting, the Han rulers had to contend with the myth of the mandate of heaven. This wasn't just a divine endorsement, it was more like celestial PR. The mandate was a philosophical concept that justified the emperor's rule as being sanctioned by the heavens themselves. But here's the twist. It worked both ways. If things went south, think natural disasters, famines, or uprisings, it was seen as a sign that the heavens were withdrawing their support. Imagine running a country where every earthquake or bad harvest could get you fired by the universe. Talk about job insecurity. Now, the romantic allure of the mandate of heaven is undeniable. It's the kind of story that makes you think of emperors sitting in lotus positions, communing with the stars. But reality was far grittier. The mandate was often used as a political tool, an ancient spin campaign to keep the populace in line and rivals at bay. When the Han dynasty faced problems like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a massive peasant uprising in 184 AD, the narrative quickly shifted to suggest that maybe the emperor had lost his divine favor. This wasn't just a rebellion. It was a full-blown crisis of legitimacy, with rebels donning yellow scarves like a medieval protest movement. The Han rulers also had to navigate the ever-looming threat of the Xiongnu nomadic tribes to the north, who were the bane of every Chinese emperor's existence. These guys were the original horse lords, and if you think dealing with a neighbor who plays loud music is bad, try handling a tribe that can raid your borders faster than you can say diplomatic env. The Han solution was a mix of military campaigns and marriage alliances, an early version of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Despite these challenges, the Han dynasty was a time of incredible innovation. Technological advances like the seismograph, invented by Zhang Heng in 132 AD, allowed them to detect earthquakes, a nifty gadget in a country prone to tremors. Meanwhile, paper, another Han invention, revolutionized record-keeping and communication, facilitating the spread of knowledge in a way that would make Gutenberg blush. In peeling back the layers of the Han dynasty, we find a civilization that was as much about inventing the future as it was about managing the present. The Silk Road connected worlds, the mandate of heaven-controlled narratives, and the bureaucratic machine kept chugging along despite its hiccups. It's a story of ambition, ingenuity, and the constant struggle to maintain order, a theme as timeless as history itself. So, the next time you hear about the grandeur of ancient China, remember that beneath the silk and splendor lay a world grappling with challenges that resonate to this day. And as we leave the Han dynasty behind, we keep the lessons and legacies in tow, ready to explore the next chapter in our historical odyssey. The curtain rises on ancient Greece, where democracy wasn't just a word but a lifestyle, though perhaps not the idyllic one we imagine. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was less of a nurturing mother and more of a strict taskmaster, demanding participation from its citizens at every turn. Let's set aside the rose-tinted glasses for a moment and dive into the realpolitik of Athenian democracy, where politics was a contact sport and glory often took a backseat to economic necessity. Athens' democracy was direct, which sounds great until you realize it involved thousands of citizens gathering in the assembly like an ancient version of Twitter, but without the anonymity. Every male citizen over the age of 18 was expected to participate, which sounds inclusive until you remember that women, slaves, and foreigners, known as metics, were left out in the cold. This was a club with a strict dress code, and if you didn't have the right toga, you weren't getting in. Running a democracy wasn't cheap. Maintaining the Athenian Empire required more drachmas than you could shake a spear at. Those beautiful marble temples and bustling agoras didn't build themselves, and someone had to foot the bill. Cue the tributes from the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states with Athens as its self-appointed leader. Member states paid tribute in the form of ships, soldiers, or, more commonly, silver, which kept the Athenian economy afloat and funded their grandiose projects. The League was less a union of equals and more of a protection racket, with Athens as the godfather offering protection against Persian invasion. The cost of empire extended beyond finances. Athens' navy, the pride of its military might, didn't just patrol the Aegean for fun. Maintaining such a fleet required a constant supply of rowers, citizens who were paid to spend their days under the Mediterranean sun, rowing from dawn till dusk. This wasn't just a workout. It was a way of life that kept the Athenian military machine in perpetual motion. But let's not forget the politics. Athenian democracy was a hotbed of intrigue and scandal that would make a modern tabloid blush. The system of ostracism allowed citizens to vote on exiling a fellow citizen for 10 years. It was less about justice and more about power plays, with influential figures often finding themselves on the wrong end of a pottery shard. Imagine being voted off your own island because you were too successful or too popular. Talk about a reality show with real-life consequences. Meanwhile, city-state rivalries simmered like a cauldron of grudges. Forget the united front against a common enemy. Greek city-states were more like siblings fighting over the last piece of baklava. Sparta, Athens' perennial frenemy, was less concerned with democratic ideals and more focused on military might. The Peloponnesian War, a decades-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, was a classic case of sibling rivalry on steroids. It wasn't just about glory or honor. It was a struggle for survival, with each city-state vying for control over trade routes and resources. The economic realities of these rivalries were stark. During the war, Athens implemented the Decree of Megara, a trade embargo designed to suffocate the Spartan ally by cutting off their access to Athenian markets. It was an ancient version of economic sanctions, with devastating effects on Megara's economy. The embargo was a reminder that, in the Greek world, economic warfare was just as potent as military conflict. Despite the harsh realities, the romantic image of noble Athenians debating philosophy under the shade of olive trees endures. But beneath the philosophical musings lay a society grappling with the same issues that plague us today: economic inequality, political corruption, and the challenge of balancing power with principle. The myth of a perfect democracy is alluring, but the truth is far more complex and, dare I say, relatable. As we peel back the layers of Athens' storied past, we find a city constantly reinventing itself, striving to balance its ideals with the demands of empire. Democracy may have been born in Athens, but it was a birth fraught with labor pains and the occasional bout of morning sickness. The lessons of ancient Greece remind us that even the most celebrated systems of government are imperfect, shaped by the messy realities of human nature. So, as we leave behind the sun-drenched hills of Athens and prepare to chart new waters, we carry with us the understanding that history is not a tale of unblemished heroes, but of flawed humans striving for something greater. The Athenian experiment in democracy, with all its triumphs and failures, remains a testament to the enduring struggle for a system that serves the many rather than the few. And as we look toward the next chapter of our historical journey, we do so with a renewed appreciation for the complexities that define the human story. As we bid adieu to the marble columns of Athens and the philosophical debates that echo through its ancient ruins, our historical tour now takes us to the sun-scorched sands of the Arabian Peninsula, where a new kind of empire was on the rise. Enter the early Islamic Caliphate, a powerhouse that expanded with the speed of a viral tick-tock dance move, stretching from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the borders of India in the east. But don't let the romanticized tales of religious fervor and unity fool you. This was no simple crusade for a cause. It was a masterclass in strategic alliances, economic savvy, and administrative prowess. The year is 632 AD, and the Prophet Muhammad has just passed away, leaving his followers with a mission and a bit of an organizational headache. Cue the emergence of the Rashidun Caliphate, the first of the Islamic caliphates, which marked the beginning of an expansion that would make even Alexander the Great do a double-take. In a mere 30 years, the caliphate spread its wings over a vast area, conquering the Sasanian Empire and large swathes of the Byzantine Empire. Talk about a rapid growth strategy. But let's not get carried away with tales of swords and sandals. The real story lies in the pragmatic decisions that fueled this expansion. One of the biggest draws for the conquering forces was the economic allure of the lands they captured. The Fertile Crescent, a region as wealthy as its name suggests, was the agricultural jackpot that could feed armies and fill coffers. Cities like Damascus and Baghdad weren't just cultural hubs. They were economic powerhouses that could bankroll further conquests. And speaking of those conquests, the early caliphs were no slouches when it came to political maneuvering. They understood that spreading Islam was as much about winning hearts and minds as it was about winning battles. The early Islamic leaders made a strategic play by offering religious tolerance and economic incentives to newly conquered peoples. Non-Muslims, known as dhimmis, were allowed to practice their faiths in exchange for paying a tax called the jizya. It was less about religious oppression and more about pragmatic taxation, a way to keep the treasury stocked without alienating the local population. While the myth of a monolithic Islamic unity paints a picture of a united religious front, the reality was a mosaic of tribes, cultures, and languages woven together by a shared political and economic framework. The Umayyad Caliphate, which followed the Rashidun, was particularly adept at managing this diversity. They established Arabic as the administrative language, creating a cohesive bureaucratic system that was as efficient as it was expansive. It was like installing a universal operating system on a patchwork of different devices, ensuring everything ran smoothly, or at least as smoothly as possible in the tumultuous world of empire building. But let's not gloss over the internal tensions and power struggles that simmered beneath the surface. The Umayyad Caliphate faced its own version of corporate infighting, with power concentrated in the hands of a few elite families. This centralization of power, combined with growing resentment among the non-Arab Muslims, laid the groundwork for the eventual rise of the Abbasid Caliphate in 750 AD. The Abbasids capitalized on the discontent, promising a more inclusive regime and shifting the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, a city that would become the jewel of the Islamic world. Baghdad in its heyday was a marvel of urban planning and cultural brilliance, a place where scholars from all corners of the known world gathered like moths to a flame. The House of Wisdom, an intellectual powerhouse, was the brainchild of the Abbasids, serving as a beacon of learning where Greek, Persian, and Indian texts were translated into Arabic. It was a golden age of science, philosophy, and innovation that made Renaissance Europe look like a slow starter. Yet, beneath the intellectual renaissance, the Abbasid Caliphate was not immune to the challenges that come with running a sprawling empire. Economic disparities, political corruption, and the constant threat of rebellion were the thorns in their side. The romantic image of an enlightened caliphate is tempered by the harsh realities of governing a diverse empire, where the unity of the faith often took a backseat to the practicalities of power and politics. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through the early Islamic caliphates, It's clear that their legacy is as complex as the intricate patterns adorning their art and architecture. The rapid expansion of Islam was not just a spiritual journey, but a testament to the power of strategic alliances, economic acumen, and administrative innovation. While the myths of religious unity provide a captivating narrative, the truth reveals a more nuanced tapestry of human ambition and adaptability. In the grand tapestry of history, the early Islamic caliphates stand as a reminder that empires are built not just on ideals, but on the pragmatic decisions that navigate the murky waters of power, politics, and economics. As we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, we carry forward the understanding that the past is never as simple as it seems. It's a mosaic of stories, each with its own shades of truth and myth, and it's in this complexity that we find the enduring lessons of our shared human journey. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let these tales of conquest and cunning remind you that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to understanding what is and what might yet be.